Sup you sinister folks, welcome to the part 5, of What If Deku's Cursed Blood, Could You Know Reverse Death, Chapter 14 A Sinister Result. Mitsuki Bakugo stumbled out of the office building she'd been trapped in for hours now, her legs wobbly and knees weak. Any casual observer would have agreed that the woman looked ill. If she'd been asked, the Ashen Mother would have agreed and said she felt as if her stomach was about to expel its contents. Gods above, please help me, Mitsuki mumbled as she slid down, taking a seat right on the stairs out front of her previous prison. The distraught look that twisted her face, caused by what she just experienced, was heart-wrenching to see. The meeting with the lawyers had started off on unsteady and hazardous footing. It was obvious to anyone that looked at him that Katsuki was unrepentant, but the blonde had still asked for forgiveness as his mother had instructed him to. He'd even behaved somewhat civilly. Their, or rather Mitsuki's, plan had been simple and full of holes. It had relied largely on the lawyers being neither too bright nor out for blood. It had become depressingly apparent as the day wore on that neither condition was going to fall in the Bakugo family's favor. Katsuki had followed orders, had bowed and admitted that he'd been blinded by his bloodlust after being thoroughly defeated by Izuku. The blonde had apologized and sworn an oath to never allow such a thing to happen again. He'd added that he hadn't meant to harm his other two classmates, only the one he knew could shrug off such an attack without too much trouble. Mitsuki had believed that if they'd pushed that her son's actions had clearly been meant to be non-lethal in nature, any sentence would be reduced in severity. After that had come questions. The Asui lawyer, Kamishiro, had opened with asking Katsuki why he'd blatantly ignored the signal that ended the exercise. Knowing that this would come up, Mitsuki had already instructed her son on how to reply. Even so, none of the three sitting in judgment seemed convinced when it was related to them, that Izuku's punches had been so strong they'd muddled the explosive blonde's perceptions. Sakamoto hadn't even tried to hide his disgust when the idea of mistaking the buzzing alert for a time warning was thrown in. The Ashen Mother had watched with increasing worry as the lawyers had deliberated right in front of them. There had been no attempts to hide the three's distrust regarding her son. Concerning words such as animal and psychopath had been uttered, even delusional had been heard more than once. Mitsuki was forced to grip Katsuki's arm as hard as she could in order to keep him quiet. Then the Ida lawyer, Hange, had spoken just slightly louder. An idiot that's unable or unwilling to shoulder the responsibility for his actions is worse than the lowest of commoners. The haughty words had been too much for his already eviscerated pride, and Katsuki had growled deep in his throat. Mitsuki had tightened her grip on him as harshly as possible, her deadliest glare directed his way, but it was too little, too late. Kamishiro had caught her son's reaction. The violet-haired woman had thrown the Bakugos a malevolent smirk before. Everything went downhill. "Command, easy now boy," said a large, robust man garbed in white clothes as he guided a trembling Katsuki down the stairs. The two's destination was the white, armored vehicle parked one spot over from where the Ashen Mother had collapsed. "Do as you're told and there won't be any need for chains, you hear?" Mitsuki looked at her son as he and his handler passed by her. Her Katsuki was about to be transported to a mental institution where he'd be bombarded with tests designed to decide if it was, or ever would be, safe to release him back into society. For the first time, his normally scowling crimson eyes were wide with fear and pleading for help. Her own, however, were full of despair. It was near the end of the meeting that Kamishiro had sprung her trap, coming up with a brilliant idea. Since they only had Katsuki's word as assurance, why not professionally check his mental stability by secluding him away for a month at a special institute? In theory, this would allow a larger window of opportunity for Mitsuki to build her own case to present to a court in case of a trial, a possibility all three lawyers had made plain was still on the table. Meanwhile, the concerned parties would be given the chance to discover for themselves if her son was still made of the stuff of heroes. Mitsuki knew differently though. If left to his own devices, Katsuki would no doubt turn violent, physically or verbally. He'd either say something delusional or, worse yet, attempt to foist blame for everything on someone else. His own words would tie the noose around his neck better than any witness. This was why Mitsuki realized the Asui were so feared. It wasn't for their raw power, their familial quirk, who was afraid of frogs. It was their villainous cunning and the inescapable influence it had built for them that made them titans of society. Refusing had been impossible, and stalling would have only made things worse. There'd been no other option than to acquiesce and allow her son be thrown into the lion's den. "Please. Just one more time," Mitsuki murmured as she shakily reached for her phone. Her only lifeline now, her only hope, was Inko. "Please Ko-chan. Please." Unforeseen simulation joined, staff-only room. When Nezu had arrived at the premises of the facility of his academy that was under attack, he'd found that it was all over. The assault had been stopped. However, the sight of numerous ambulances being loaded with students, and armored trucks chock full of villains, had sent him reeling. It had taken him a full minute to recover, but then he'd ordered all able-bodied first-year teachers to convene in their current enclosed room. "How were our students holding up?" Nezu threw out his first and most important, to him, question. The quirked animal looked around the room, growing more worried than he'd been as each of his teachers looked away when he locked eyes with them, seemingly too hesitant to answer. Whatever the news was, it was clear he wasn't going to like the answer. Physically speaking, only a bare minimum ended up acquiring injuries that required medical attention, Aizawa started to report as soon as his turn came up. The gruff man showed no uncertainty or unwillingness to speak. "As for psychological trauma, we're looking at some difficult situations." Nezu grimaced as he read through the report in his paw hands. While around half of the students had been able to fend off their attackers with a commendable level of skill, it quickly became apparent to anyone with eyes that no one on either side had escaped completely unscathed. The stronger students, more concerned with protecting their classmates and themselves, had been much less mindful of dealing lasting damage to their opponents than anyone could have expected. Even though the self-defense clause irrefutably applied to this situation, the school would no doubt soon have those vultures known as journalists and reporters baying for blood. The lack of restraint shown in some of the wounds reported by the arrested villains was going to be low-hanging fruit for the media to pick at. But of those with physical injuries, Aizawa continued, still commanding the attention of the others present. "We have a few that were classified as having needed immediate intensive care." "You mean Ida, Midoriya, and Iarazu?" Midnight asked for clarification. The R-rated heroine knew the kind of trouble each of those teens could indirectly cause, each in their own way. "What are their prognoses? Will they recover soon?" Those in attendance already knew the answer to that question in the case of Tenya Ida. After racing to meet with All Might on his way to the main campus, the studious teen had kept accelerating to reach the rest of the staff even as his engines had overheated. The bespectacled student had arrived to a shocked audience screaming at the top of his lungs, his message forcefully clear through obvious pain and panic. When the staff had gone to retake the USJ, taking the Ida with them, Tenya had been visibly shaken upon seeing the state many of his classmates were in. Then he'd succumbed to his wounds and slipped into unconsciousness. Of course, as was now the tradition, the cavalry had arrived too late to be of much use. Snipe had, thanks in part to his quirk, been quick to take out the mobility of all villains that had been in the open, ensuring those already downed could neither escape nor resist. Unfortunately, he'd only had time to shoot a handful of holes into the arms of what had appeared to be the leader of the assault, before he'd managed to get away. Tenya Ida suffered second-degree burns to his calves, interior and exterior, and near-melted engines, Aizawa replied, surprising a few who hadn't known the extent of the teen's injuries. He's expected to be recovered and released from his family's hospital of choice by tomorrow evening. With that update, only Midoriya and Iarazu were left, and Nezu really didn't want to dwell on the can of worms those two were if he didn't have to. On an intellectual level, the quirked animal could understand the reasoning behind Midoriya's actions based on the situation as described by Aizawa. All Might had been struggling far too much to subdue the monstrous Namu, and something had to be done to carry the day. The maneuver had even been a smart one. The fallout of forcefully asserting control over a sentient being would have been minimal if handled cautiously compared to killing one. If only All Might hadn't lost his grip on the villain. Momoyarazu was another story entirely. The young lady had been hurt as a result of a quirk that by all rights shouldn't have been viable in the first place. Poor Midoriya was now going to have to deal with the QRA breathing down his neck when it came to light he was controlling zombies that were fully capable of utilizing their quirks. If that weren't bad enough, the mature teen, if not her parents, would most likely seek retribution of some sort for the mishap. Although, all things considered, the Arazu family should probably be more grateful than anything. Their heiress had survived the assault with her honor and virtue intact. Which was saying something considering it turned out that the group of villains that had populated the disaster zone she'd been sent to had been comprised of mostly convicted or suspected rapists. Momoyarazu on the other hand appears to need only a couple days of recovery. Aizawa pushed on, sighing as he clarified, "Recovery girl says the machinations of the inner ear, as delicate as they are, will always take more time than anticipated to heal." There were nods of agreement at this. More than one at the table had accidentally been caught in one of President Mick's sonic scream attacks and remembered the annoyingly long time it took to recuperate. Midoriya will require significantly more time than any of the others. Aizawa finished, offering no further information. Nezu failed to contain his flinch. Izuku Midoriya, while an unbelievably powerful healer of last resort, had been earmarked for longer than his attendants as one who was weaker in regards to the actual combat side of things. Despite that fact, the green-haired teen had proven himself more than adequate during the assault. He'd shown skill at every range and level of conflict, provided combat support, and even downed himself quite a number of dangerous criminals. But then, there was the caveat. It was always so easy to forget that regenerators like Midoriya weren't actually immortal, much less unbreakable, until something like what happened to the hero in training proved it once again. Inko Midoriya had been exceedingly difficult to deal with over the course of the previous incident her son had been involved in, so Nezu had no reason to believe now would be any different. Her reaction might even reach hysterical at this point. The quirked animal wondered if the homely woman would team up with one of the more influential parents this time. "What about 13? President Mick suddenly asked, then looked at his longtime friend with evident worry. "What about you?" The congregated pro-heroes plus principal turned to Aizawa expectantly. The underground hero only narrowed his eyes, knowing full well what was on the minds of those watching him. While 13's injuries are incredibly severe, there's no evidence of any that could be considered life-threatening. But Recovery Girl did suggest a long vacation. Aizawa said, allowing a minute of silence before giving in and sharing the information his co-workers wanted to hear. "As for myself, I recognize that I'm currently under the control effects of Izuku's blood. There doesn't seem to be many adverse side effects so far, and all of the potentially mortal injuries I'd accrued have mostly healed." More than one pair of ears noted the slip in the underground hero's speech. Never before had the man ever referred to one of his students by their given name. It was proof enough as to one of the effects of the regenerator's quirk. The gruff teacher frowned at the inquisitive stares he was receiving from his fellow teachers. In the end, however, he decided not to allow his newfound appreciation for his green-haired cinnamon roll of a student to color his response. Had he just referred to Izuku as a delicious pastry? Great, now he was hungry as well as tired. Maybe that new pharmacy down the street sold cinnamon-coated melatonin tablets? I'm aware that my objectivity concerning my students is currently compromised. Therefore I will defer to Nezu's decision in regards to the following actions that will be taken, Aizawa stated, showing that even if his bias had been clouded, his capacity for logical thinking was working fine. It didn't ease the minds of his co-workers much however. "I still wish to finish my report though, so at the very least you have a clearer image moving forward." Nezu was willing to take the good with the bad when it came to his underground hero teacher. Aizawa's survival was a priceless blessing. Even if for the foreseeable future he was compromised by the quirk of one of his favorite students. It was too bad that those in power would be apt to take even the most inconspicuous of words from the green-haired teen as an abuse of power. Among those students most affected on a psychological level, Aizawa changed topics, getting tired of the stares he was seeing. He actively ignored the handful of flinches his co-workers made at his words. It appears that Okako Uraraka, Taru Hagakure, Suasui, and Minoru Mineta are in dire need of counseling and psychiatric evaluation. The last one for an entirely different set of reasons. Not one of the pro-heroes present argued with the idea that this was an issue that needed to be tackled quickly. It was unreasonable to expect students, especially first years, to deal with such trauma alone. Even active members of the Hero Society, who faced horrors like this on a daily basis, were required to go to therapy every other week in most cases. These kids who hadn't even started learning the ropes would definitely need help. To make a prickly situation even worse, after losing one student only just recently, another had succumbed to the stress of the situation and went as far as to propose his female classmates surrender themselves to the attacking villains in the hopes of increasing his own survival chances. This transgression would have to be handled with the utmost delicacy, as the young women in question were completely within their rights to press charges for such suggestions. If not addressed with due haste, it was likely that righteous fury would spread to the school. And if that wasn't bad enough, Mineta's actions alone would give the media another field day to enjoy. There'd be unending questions stemming from the diminutive student, stretching from my school acceptance role to its admittance policy. What about the kid with the weird shadow entity in his stomach? Vlad King spoke up now. The creases running across the blood hero's brow showed the man's worry about the episode of madness the teen had reportedly fallen into as described by two trembling students and countless mauled criminals. Tokoyami, I believe his name was? Aizawa would have waved away his fellow hero course homeroom teacher's concern, but he was too tired to do so. Instead, the gruff man just sighed as he recalled the medical reports of those that were pulled from the downpour zone. Under all the blood, oil, grime, and mud, the worst the villains received were a couple of broken legs and dislocated shoulders, the underground hero replied, heading off any more distrust for one of his students. In the end, he caused much less overall damage than Todoroki, who nearly caused 24 cases of frostbite. Tokoyami was largely acting to intimidate, he never truly went berserk. If Nezu hadn't had a massive migraine forming since the minute this meeting started, he'd have had one starting now. It always boiled down to the same thing. They preached to their pupils to always go beyond, but whenever a student was actually forced to go plus ultra, the event always generated backlash and mistrust from the public. The problem this time was over a dozen students had been forced into such a situation. Recovery Girl's nurse's office. Seemingly dead to the world as he laid on his hospital bed, the boy with the cursed blood slumbered away in a comatose state. According to Recovery Girl, scans indicated that nearly every major internal organ had been crushed under the monstrous pressure the hands of the Namu had produced when he'd been smashed and thrown away. The green-haired teen's ribcage had also been almost completely pulverized, along with his spine having been twisted beyond the mortal scope of those without enhancement quirks. By all rights, Izuku should have died at the USJ. Instantly. Ugh. The faintest of grunts escaped the lips of the bed's occupant. The sound was soon followed by the barest of flickers of eyelids trying to open. In an instant, Su was by the side of the one who'd come to mean so much to her. Earlier, the frog girl had been losing the battle against hysteria when Izuku had lost consciousness, refusing to leave his side even in the face of Recovery Girl's stern assurances. Her friend's heart had started to beat again and his regeneration was working at its normal pace. What had been most worrisome after that had finally sunken in had then been the fact that his fever had remained until only moments ago. Izuku? Tsu was quick to take hold of her cinnamon roll's hand, tears building once again in her eyes. A potent mixture of relief and fear bubbled up in the drained frog girl. There might have been less to worry about, but it had been discovered, after the fact, that both Tay and Lily had stopped moving at some point during the assault. The two zombie girls had been carried to the nurse's office like corpses, since no one could get them to wake up. Recovery Girl had been about to surrender them to the local morgue if it hadn't been for the two snapping open their eyes when she picked up the phone. The frantic searching of dull red eyes had clearly been a sign that the two had been looking for their master, so the elderly heroine had left them alone. The QRA had then called and, tactful as ever, had requesting that, if possible, they be given custody of the still responsive but immobilized zombies. There'd been open remarks of the battery of tests being prepared for the girls, but Nezu had put his foot down. The principal had made it unequivocally clear that both Tay and Lily were to remain under the watchful eye of his academy until the quirk user who had created them gave explicit permission concerning their fates. The end result was a nurse's office more crowded than it had ever been before. Tay and Lily together occupied the bed next to Izuku, appearing much like lifeless puppets, and across from the green-haired teen's other side rested Momo. The mature girl was still recovering from the after-effects of Lily's quirk, and Recovery Girl was not looking forward to meeting the academic recommendation students' parents. "Tsu-chan," Izuku hoarsely answered back. Swallowing thickly, he opened his eyes fully and was happy beyond reason at the sight of his beloved frog girl being the first thing he saw. "How long have I been out?" The young hero in training felt strangely sluggish, and a lingering pain still coursed through his entire body. It was similar to the typical aches of the common cold though, not like the sharp agony of broken bones. It was strange. The green-haired teen could also tell his mind wasn't fully recovered either. The grogginess he'd had to fight to even ask such a simple question just now rivaled that of oversleeping for hours on end. "Oh no," Izuku thought to himself through the fog of his mind. "What if it's been days since I blacked out? 4 hours. Tsu managed to choke out through the emotional whirlwind she was experiencing. The unexpectedly short answer pulled a gasp from the awakening green-haired teen. "I see," Izuku managed to say through his muddled thoughts. He was glad he hadn't worried people about his health for any long period of time. Tsu's current state was concerning though. It's a good thing that whatever else Izuku was going to say was cut off as Tsu suddenly began to hit him in the chest. The green-haired teen yelped from the unexpected aggression, but none of the strikes actually carried enough force to hurt him. He was more focused on the tears flowing down the frog girl's cheeks. "You idiot!" Tsu croakily screamed while banging on Izuku's chest. "You scared me. You owe me. You owe me." The green-haired teen could make no sense of the words spoken, or why he was being hit, but he decided to do the only thing that came to mind instead of just sit there. With great effort, Izuku managed to wrap his still, weakened arms around the sobbing frog girl and draw her into a hug. Her reluctance affront, Tsu begrudgingly sank into the embrace, her sobs turning to sniffles and small gasps. After a few minutes of this, she was able to find her voice. "You didn't answer," the frog girl stated shakily. "You wouldn't, no matter how much I cried out." Your heart stopped for 2 minutes. Izuku inhaled deeply, a margin of understanding of the frog girl's actions sweeping through him. His injuries must have been really bad this time. "I thought you wouldn't come back," Tsu continued, letting everything she bottled up come rushing out. "I thought I'd lost you. And I hadn't, before I could. Before I..." An inkling of what the frog girl was trying to say sparked in Izuku's mind as the fog finally cleared. Like kindling, the inkling caught some indefinable thing in his chest on fire. It throbbed. He didn't know what it was, but he did know what he had to do now. It might be too soon to tackle such emotions, but the idea of hurting his beloved Tsu was worse than anything he'd experienced so far. So, right there, the green-haired teen manned up and forced himself to take responsibility. "I'm not going anywhere, Tsu-chan," Izuku said softly, caressing the frog girl's back as she settled down to the occasional hiccup into his chest. And I won't leave you alone either. I think I love you. The green-haired teen knew that treading the path his words might have opened so early in their lives was bound to be difficult and full of pain. The love he just declared would no doubt be put to the test, over and over again. But as he looked at the girl in his arms, he knew it'd be worth every second. He would gladly strike down any adversity for her sake, and had proven just as much hours ago in fact. And after all, he could always bounce advice off of Tate-chan. Right? I think I love you too. Tsu murmured from her position, craning her head back so she could look up at the idiot who she'd fallen for. The frog girl glared through puffy eyes. But you still owe me. You owe me for life now. Izuku merely answered with a warm smile, accepting that the short girl in his arms was probably going to be taking the lead in their relationship. He could live with that. A soft tapping of knuckles on wood drew the attention of the green duo to the room's door, which now stood cracked open. Peeking inside was a softly smiling Inko Midoriya, whose watery eyes showed just how relieved she was to see both teens together and alive. Now don't stop on my account, Inko whispered in a motherly voice, chuckling as the two teens stiffened in embarrassment. Walking fully into the room, the homely mother crossed over to her son and pulled out a bag full of homemade cuisine from behind her. Tsu-chan, could you help me feed him? I don't trust these dinky yves. Nodding eagerly, Tsu wiped away her tears and smiled at the mother of her boyfriend. Boyfriend? They were together now, right? Shaking away the thought for later, the frog girl slipped from Izuku's arms to help the homely woman prepare. She was grateful for how welcoming the Midoriya matriarch had been and was determined to prove herself worthy of such support. Inko herself was wondering where the rest of her son's classmates were and why more weren't coming to his aid. If she knew her baby like she knew she did, then she was sure he'd done something recklessly heroic again to have ended up suffering such terrible injuries yet again. Surely that deserved some solidarity? Just as that thought was bringing a frown to the homely woman's lips, Jiro and Tokoyami entered the room, arms full of snacks of every nature. The sight immediately calmed the green-haired woman's mind, and she thanked the heavens for finally giving her son such steadfast friends. Back at the staff-only room, while Inko had gone to check on their children, Baru had gone to deal with UA administration. The Asui matriarch was quite ready to demand a pound of flesh and a soul while she was at it, for every child that had been injured due to the gross negligence that had allowed such a travesty to occur. As things stood at that moment, most of those that claimed the title of pro-hero in the room were trying not to cower before the frog woman in fear of her hateful glare. Nezu and Aizawa appeared largely unaffected however. And what excuse do you have this time? Baru's tone could have cut steel. Her words were so sharp the more tense of the teachers all flinched at her question. The frog woman suddenly wished All Might had still been there so she could watch him squirm as well. Alas, the symbol of peace had excused himself, citing his injury needed tending to. None whatsoever, Nezu replied, his own voice stern and serious, though no less pained for it. We simply weren't prepared to face such a coordinated strike. And to our deepest shame our students were the ones to pay the price. The glower that Baru was giving only intensified at this response. Those caught in within its sights not named Nezu or Aizawa wished they were anywhere but in that room trapped with the Asui matriarch. Unfortunately, they all knew that not dealing with the frog woman now would only make things worse later. Case in point, her firm represented the Ieyasu family. I'm afraid that these years of relative peace have ravaged the strength of our security measures, Nezu continued undeterred, regaining the attention of the angry frog woman. The budget for such was shifted over time toward different areas that appeared to need the funds more. And might I point out, these reallocations were all suggested by the school's economic advisor. Baru felt her eye twitch at this. Of course the quirked animal would bring up that one specific detail. Her firm had suggested the woman in question to U8 to begin with. At least the wrathful mother knew whose head was going to roll first before the day was up. We can play the blame game, as much as you want, but that doesn't change what must be done now, Aizawa suddenly stated, standing from his seat to hand the Asui matriarch a manila folder he'd been holding. His co-workers might have wanted to stop the man, but none had the courage to move. "And I believe you can help." The frog woman grabbed the folder with more force than strictly necessary, wondering why the gruff man wasn't, struck by fear like the other spineless excuses for heroes in the room. All it took was a moment to lock eyes with the underground hero for it all to make sense. "You don't deserve that blessing coursing through your veins," Baru hissed coldly, opening the folder without waiting for a response. "I know," Aizawa replied woodenly in the face of such a dismissal. He was rewarded with a loud tsk from the now preoccupied frog woman. The information in her hands was a lot for Baru to take in all at once, almost too much. On one hand, what the words in front of her said made her want to call for even more heads to line her chopping block. On the other, she knew her top priorities were keeping the children, specifically Izuku in this case, protected. The faculty members of UA weren't the only ones who knew of the media's distasteful fixation on tragedies. A villain, no matter how monstrous, winding up dead at the hands of a student? The leeches would smear the green-haired teen's name just for the ratings alone, never mind them doing their actual job of reporting the truth. She'd seen it happen before, and wouldn't allow it to happen again. Baru knew if she didn't act quickly, Izuku would be framed for lethal misuse of his quirk against another human being, and his fate would be as good as sealed. The public wouldn't care that his quirk didn't actually have any actively offensive capabilities, just that a hero in training had killed someone. The fact that the villain had been holding his own against All Might wouldn't even register with them either. The Asui matriarch would have to make a few calls now. And while she did that, she'd have to leave the mental health of Izuku and her daughter to her now beloved friend and fellow mother. Nurse's office, a few minutes later. After watching Izuku demolish every scrap of food put in front of him, Tsu and Inko had excused themselves from the room. Apparently the homely mother had wanted to speak privately with the frog girl that was now his girlfriend. Girlfriend. That gave the green-haired teen pause. He now had a girlfriend. He supposed they weren't quite official, they hadn't kissed yet after all. That's how it went, right? There was a declaration of intent and then a kiss to seal the deal? Regardless of their relationship status, their classmates were sure to make a big deal of the news. If he were honest with himself, Izuku was kind of hoping for that sealing the deal part. Something to look forward to. The green-haired teen muttered to himself. At that moment, the last of the fog cleared from his mind, and a grimace pulled at his face as the events of the assault on the USGA finally began to process. Flickering memories appeared before his mind's eye, and now, without the adrenaline coursing through his system, Izuku felt like he could truly analyze the facts. The most ominous and worrisome was the one that was impossible to deny. Accident or not, he'd killed. That alone was grounds for not only expulsion, but prison time as well. Putting aside the realization that his dream had died alongside the villain named Namu, the green-haired teen considered the next problem. Aizawa. While his homeroom teacher had asked to be healed, the moment his blood had entered the man's system, there'd been no real supervision over his quirk's use. Thinking it over, the whole final scene grew more sinister when seen in that light. In those few seconds before the second counterattack, it had been Aizawa who'd proposed the use of Izuku's blood to hijack the Namu. Or, had it? Did the underground hero truly suggest that particular plan to pacify the enemy? Or had his blood influenced the call with the alternative goal of expanding its influence? Try to get some rest, Yamamo. Izuku was snapped from his thoughts by the pacifying voice of Jiro, who'd taken a seat on the bed opposite him where the mature girl had been resting. Toko and I will keep an eye on your duties for you, so just take it easy. Izuku felt the familiar sludge-like heaviness of guilt well up inside of him at the sight of the two girls. He would be taking partial responsibility for Momo's condition as well. Lily had told him about her quirk, Dissonant Song, soon after her raising. He'd theorized that as an undead, the little zombie girl would actually be able to use her ability long enough for it to be useful, but he'd failed to take into consideration important factors. If he'd done his job and taken the proper precautions, then Momo wouldn't have ended up affected alongside the villains. No matter how he looked at it, he'd failed again. The only saving grace this time was that no one he'd cared about had died. "Worry not, Midoriya," Tokoyami added, once more putting on his dramatics. "Your responsibilities shall not weigh upon your shoulders either. We will bear their burden for you should your quirk stagger in the face of the immensity of your injuries." After puzzling out the edgelord's meaning, Izuku couldn't help but feel humbled. A monster like himself, who could easily kill someone if he didn't keep his own quirk under control, had no business having friends of such caliber. The memory of taking a backseat while a darker part of himself drove forward during the crisis was still fresh in his mind, and the green-haired teen still couldn't recognize the personality that took charge and nearly killed one of the villains in cold blood. "Thanks," Izuku whispered through the emotion his thoughts were dragging up. And then, before he could help himself, he blurted out words even he couldn't believe he'd ever say. "Fumikage. Kyauka. For everything." The named pair flushed at the acknowledgement. With awkward smiles, the two left the room. Izuku made a mental note to ask if he'd gone too far too soon. With nothing else to do for the moment, Izuku watched as Momo ate some of her snacks with a look of guilty pleasure upon her face. The sight, surprisingly, helped to ease his mind. At the very least the class president would recover. And as was its nature, the green-haired teen's mind instantly turned from that happy thought to more troubling ones, such as what would he do if his classmates demanded he step down as class vice president? Or worse, what if someone tried to hit on Tsu? She was cute beyond all reason, so it was bound to happen eventually. "Izuku-kun?" Snapped from his thoughts once again, Izuku blinked before turning to the office's doorway, where Okako now stood looking around at the room's occupants. "Are you feeling better?" The green-haired teen gave the brunette a small nod. From what he could remember while being in the backseat, he should be grateful for the rosy-cheeked girl. She stopped him from becoming an executioner when he had that missed villain dead to rights. Deciding to act on the side of caution, he didn't comment on it though. If he wasn't ready to confront the moment of his murderous thoughts, he doubted his classmate was. "I'm glad," Okako exclaimed with a smile. Carefully, as if to avoid getting too close to the two motionless zombies, the brunette stepped closer until she was standing by Izuku's bed. What happened to them? It wasn't a lie to say Okako had been worrying herself sick over her green-haired classmate, more like an understatement. The brunette felt somewhat responsible for his injuries since she hadn't given him any real support during the assault. That guilt mixed with the admiration she felt when she remembered how much of a badass he'd been, leaving her stuck between showing her gratitude and hanging her head in shame. But when Okako had heard what Izuku had done for Tsu, she couldn't help but fantasize. What if it had been her in the frog girl's place? The thought made her stomach tingle, and not in the way her quirk did. Tae-chan and Lily-chan. They're really low on active blood right now, Izuku tried to explain. He could still feel the ever-present connections he shared with the zombie girls, but they were incredibly weak at the moment. They needed to feed, but with his own health risk, it just wasn't possible. If they try to move again, they risk a second death. Probably. Okako smiled, but not for the reason Izuku was probably thinking she was. The rosy-cheeked girl was ashamed to say it, but she was a little happy to hear about the state of the zombie girls. She really liked her green-haired classmate, but as he'd said the day they'd met, it was only natural for people to fear what was bizarre and unnatural to them. And while Lily was the cutest thing ever, Tae gave the brunette the creeps. If he had to let go of the two, then Izuku would no doubt be distraught though, which also didn't sit well with the anti-gravity teen. She'd just have to comfort him then, as a friend of course. A friend who was interested in seeing if the connection they'd built over their experience at the USJ could lead to more. After all, in Okako's mind, the green-haired teen was fair game. He might have saved Tsu already, and more than once, but now she'd been saved too. And with the frog girl being just a little on the pushy side, Her own chances of gaining Izuku's attention just had to be higher. It wasn't like the green duo had already expressed their feelings for each other, right? All she had to do was make her own move before it was too late, discreetly, without stepping on any toe. So, they're ready to move on? Okako asked hesitantly, hoping it sounded like she was honestly curious and not like she didn't want the zombie girls around. Tae-chan doesn't seem to want to go, Izuku replied firmly, fighting a frown. The Verdanet had to remind himself that his classmate hadn't directly attacked his partners, just asked an innocent question. And Lily? She's waiting for her father to come back. Words aside, Izuku wasn't naive enough to believe the situation he found himself in was as simple as it looked. Years of being bullied had forced a near-encyclopedic knowledge of body language into his head, and the brunettes made it clear that his undead partners made her nervous and she wanted them buried. For her part, Okako accepted the answer easily enough with a nod. Thinking she'd navigated that conversational trap well enough, the anti-gravity teen decided to move in and make a quick play before the other girls in their class caught on to the true potential of the boy in front of her. I see. The brunette gave her best smile, tilting her head a certain way her parents had always told her was cute. Say. Do you think we could maybe hang out later? Izuku stared at Okako in wide-eyed shock, flabbergasted. Okako took the look as a good sign the green-haired teen was surprised anyone would be interested in him. Meaning no one had claimed him yet. I just feel guilty about what happened, you know? I stopped you from capturing that Miss Villain and all. Okako explained away, fidgeting under the flimsiness of her excuse. And I've heard of this place with really good mochi and so. There was no way to keep the frown from his face this time, so Izuku didn't try to hide it. He didn't want to believe that the rosy-cheeked girl was proposing what he feared she was. You mean? Izuku paused, unable to keep his voice from wavering. A sudden sense of dread descended upon him. Like a date? Okako's suddenly blushing face could have matched Kirishima's hair in intensity. The brunette felt so happy that her classmate had caught on so quickly. Maybe getting with him wouldn't be as hard as she'd thought? Pushing away her nerves, the anti-gravity teen gave a determined, firm nod. No, Izuku immediately answered, shaking his head. He softened his frown. That can't happen. Disappointment hit Okako like a freight train, literally rocking her back on her heels. Had she pushed too far or too fast? Huh? The brunette gasped. Why not? Because he's already mine. The unexpected declaration from Tsu coming from directly behind Okako caused the anti-gravity teen to jump into the air with a rather loud deep. What? Okako asked, shocked at the discovery. Already? How? When? Feeling bad for his normally bubbly classmate, who now looked devastated, Izuku went to answer when Tsu moved first. Faster than the green-haired teen could react, the frog girl wrapped her arms around her definitely boyfriend in a hug and pulled his head down to her sizable breasts. With his head buried in a pleasant prison, the hero in training didn't see the poisonous glare his girlfriend directed at Okako. The message was clear to her though. Back off. Okako knew she'd been beaten, that the cinnamon roll had been taken. The bright future she'd envisioned for herself and her parents, free from their financial woes, turned to dust before her eyes as the green-haired teen's fate was sealed with another. It would have hurt less if the boy in question hadn't returned the hug he was being given, clearly enjoying the attention. I understand. Okako managed to choke out, doing her best to deal with the rejection. Oh, who was she kidding? It was too much to take. I'm sorry. With that, the now sniffling brunette darted out of the room, fighting back tears and the sting of defeat. While she knew there was no point in dwelling on what had just happened, it still hurt. She needed to be alone. From her bed, Momo had been calmly observing the whole scene, unsure of what was going on. She'd never gotten around to learning to lip read, so the mature girl felt the need to ask for some clarification. What happened? Momo asked, speaking at a completely Acceptable. Level. Even so, she still couldn't hear anything over the ringing that hadn't left her ears. Is she okay? Realizing their class president was still deaf as a result of Lily's quirk, both Izuku and Tsuyu couldn't help but sigh in frustration. Now they'd have to try and explain the misunderstanding and their relationship to the mature girl while she yelled at them. Did you say something? Momo questioned, seeing lips move but only hearing ringing. Is Lily-chan alright? Izuku held on to a faint hope that Momo's parents wouldn't sue him for this. And if they did, he idly wondered if Tsuyu's mother would kindly represent him in court. Chapter 15: A Sinister Truth. While the rest of the hemisphere slumbered under the peace of mind brought by heroes like All Might, Recovery Girl remained awake, locked away in her office. For the 10th time that night, the elderly heroine found herself poring over her private notes on the boy with the cursed blood. Every fiber of her withered being was turned to understanding the quirk that had her tasting the beginnings of a new era in medicine. She mustered every ounce of medical knowledge she had gathered over her decades of life, but, to her continued frustration, the more important answers remained shrouded, dangling just beyond her reach. What makes this quirk actually tick? Recovery Girl muttered to herself as she once again began to read over the files from the top. If she could have just cut a chunk out of the green-haired teen, then she'd have been able to study his blood cells in optimal conditions. But ethics, morals, and the principal himself wouldn't allow that at all. I will make you reveal your secrets. The declaration was fierce, but quiet. Glancing at the other end of her office, Recovery Girl eyed the still sleeping forms of her patients. Earlier, the elderly heroine had been forced to demand Izuku stay an extra night for additional observation. The idiot had acted rashly and plunged a pair of syringes into himself to get the blood needed to revitalize his undead partners. Instead of waiting for qualified hands to return, he'd ended up draining too much too quickly and had left himself weak and lightheaded. Thankfully, Lily had returned to her chipper self almost immediately. Unfortunately, Tay had seemingly been forced to use her entire injection of blood to repair her broken body. The elder zombie girl had fallen back onto her bed almost instantly after the last of her wounds had rejuvenated, debilitated once more. And as of now, that's where she'd been left for the time being until her master could safely give her more sustenance. As Izuku had fretted over Tay's listless state, and his inability to assist her further with Recovery Girl breathing down his neck, Lily had almost immediately fallen into hysterics once she'd realized what her actions had done to Momo. The littlest zombie girl had attempted to plead for forgiveness from her big sis, drowning in guilt. The result? Lily currently found herself trapped in a hug, both a body pillow and a therapeutic mascot for the Arazu heiress. Never before had the elderly heroine actually been grateful for parents to be too busy to come and check on their child. Explaining any of this would have been such a hassle. HMPH. I need more data. Recovery Girl returned to her musings, assured none of her guests had woken up. The whiteboard before her, however, was still as sparsely filled as it had been. How has there never been a precedent for this type of thing before? The board was truly a messy thing to look at. One side was covered in scrawled half-words or ideas of a promising nature such as tissue reconstruction or mimetic and transmigrant properties. The other side was also covered in scrawl, but the tone was much less encouraging. Terms such as extended usage, overheating and indiscriminate fuel consumption were underlined or circled in thick red. The elderly heroine shuddered at the sudden thought of what would happen when she eventually had to reveal Izuku's true condition. The real reason he shouldn't be allowed to leave. The reckless child may have consumed the equivalent of 9 whole days' worth of nutrients in less than an hour, but he'd still ended up losing 5 kilograms of weight just to fully recover from the injuries he'd sustained at the USJ. Even an imbecile would have been able to recognize that such dramatic weight loss was a sign of something more dangerous lurking behind the scenes. And after witnessing one of the school's many heavy steel doors get reduced to a tiny metal ball after only hinting that Izuku might still be in some level of danger, Recovery Girl really didn't want to have to report her official findings to Inko Midodriya. Ever. Hello there. The sudden sing-song greeting caused the elderly heroine to jerk in her chair, before spinning and harshly shushing the newly intruding pink-haired culprit. My Hatsum, only now realizing what time it was, winced in apology. Sorry. The spastic inventor, fresh from her work studio, was once again, as was becoming her habit, spending yet another night on campus grounds. She'd won such a privilege from Powerloader and Nezubai agreeing to keep her inventing to safe babies during off hours and working part-time as a messenger for the whole of US staff. It had become such a common sight, beginning of the school year or not, for the pinkette to be seen in nearly every office delivering letters and packages that most of the faculty saw her as part of the official campus services now. "Here's your weekly delivery, ma'am," Mai announced, now using a more subdued voice. For her, that is. The package this time was a bag, and the inventor guessed by its weight it most likely held medical magazines or booklets. "I tried to deliver it earlier this evening, but you were like super busy." While exasperated at the girl's timing, Recovery Girl decided not to judge in favor of returning to her mental wranglings. It was at that moment that Mai decided she now had the perfect opportunity to take a look around and study the machinery in the nurse's office. The pinkette had wanted to see if any of the designs could be used to improve her own babies, for the longest time, but her amber gaze fell on the glaring surface of the elderly heroine's whiteboard. "Oh. I see you're continuing the work of Nanoman over there." The excited shout pulled back on the attention of Recovery Girl so fast the old woman almost gave herself whiplash. "What?" Recovery Girl asked loudly, looking at the student before her like she'd grown a second head. Realizing what she'd done, the elderly heroine lowered her voice. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Mai continued to examine the whiteboard. The crosshairs that comprised the pinkette's irises and pupils twitched, the only outward sign the girl's quirk had activated as she'd been bewitched by the board's contents. "Can you believe it's been 10 years since he began his medical nanotic research?" Mai said absent-mindedly, the not answer earning a frustrated sigh from the pro-heroine beside her. "How did you manage to get around the singular function programming issue?" Not expecting a question, or more precisely, not expecting a question that wasn't about why she had a whiteboard covered in a student's quirk data, Recovery Girl was momentarily thrown off balance, realizing she somehow hadn't been discovered. The elderly heroine let out another sigh. "Programming? Issue?" That still didn't mean the pro-heroine had any idea what the pinkette was talking about. "What are you talking about?" Mai only pointed to the board, nodding her head as if it held all the answers. Recovery Girl knew for a fact it didn't. Well, Nanoman never managed to overcome the flaw of his nanites being too small to program with more than one task. "But it looks like you've gotten yours to handle both mimetic functions and tissue reconstruction," Mai clarified, missing the distraught face of the elderly heroine behind her. "Must have been quite the challenge. Irely is the best, isn't it? Although I see how that would increase the fuel consumption problem." Recovery Girl was torn. Part of her wanted to take the blabbering girl by the shoulders and shake her until she shut up and started making sense. Another part of her was thankful she now had a potential lead for her research. Even though Chio admitted she couldn't remember ever hearing about the hero the pinkette kept referring, that could easily have been because he was support class, underground, or just never earned much of a reputation. In any case, there would definitely be a file on him in the national database. "I guess you're also having the same problem Nanoman had with overheating too, huh?" Mai continued, unperturbed by both the fact that her audience of one wasn't responding to her and that she probably could have woken the dead with how high her voice had risen. "It's too bad you can't just make them carry some coolant." A rather abrupt beeping coming from her waist cut the young inventor off from speaking further. After checking the offending pager, Mai quickly excused herself with a short flurry of what might have been words before leaving to move on to her next task. Once more the only one awake in her office, Recovery Girl returned her gaze to the whiteboard. After a short while, the elderly heroine decided to get on with it and check on this nanoman. Maybe she'd just gotten one step closer to her goal after all. The next Monday at UA late morning, the 19 students of Hero Class 1A, plus 2 fully healed zombies, had finally reunited in their classroom. While their classes were still to be put on hold for 2 weeks, the heroes in training had been asked to convene at their homeroom in order to receive their first experience with one of Hero Society's lesser-known, but unquestionably important, necessities: therapy. After surviving the assault on the USJ-1A had been ordered to accept and complete mandatory sessions in order to work through the trauma their ordeals had undoubtedly left them with. And if they were honest with themselves, more than one student was grateful for the opportunity they'd been given. "Please, there is no need for atonement between us," Tokoyami assured the still fidgeting forms of Koda and Aoyama. The two less combat-oriented teens had just tried, for the 10th time, to express their regret for reporting their avian classmates' actions in the downpour zone as an episode of madness. "That my performance fooled even you means only that I can be assured of my ability to affect lesser minds in the future." Their attempted apology accepted, or waved off, they couldn't tell which. Koda and Aoyama stood watching as Tokoyami returned to his place in the small group of classmates that was comprised of Izuku, his zombies, Tsu, and Jiro. Neither teen would ever be able to forget the moment their avian-headed friend had become engulfed in his quirk, and they'd believed he would kill them in his rage. They would also never allow themselves to forget how they'd completely disregarded his continued effort to save them. "I'm telling you guys," Mina suddenly exclaimed, hopped up and jumpy enough her volume caught the attention of all present. "Taru-chan here was like our own MVP." Silently to herself, Taru was wishing her friend would cut it out with her antics, and was thankful when Kirishima pulled the excitable Pinkette down into the chair beside him. The invisible girl hadn't said anything, but she'd spent the entire weekend locked in her room, unable to take her mind off what she'd gone through. The horrible images she'd witnessed in the ruin zone repeated themselves endlessly in her head, making sleep impossible. What was even worse, she'd found, was what would happen if she pushed the images down hard enough. Her thoughts wouldn't leave her alone, oh no. Instead, every possible worst-case scenario would start to play out before her eyes. And these scenarios didn't stop with her and Mina merely being captured by the villains. Above all, Taru had to do everything in her power to ignore the fact that during all the madness going on in the ruined zone, while Kirishima and Mina and Ojiro had fought so hard, she'd thought more than once of just running away. "Is this really necessary?" Izuku asked, plaintively referring to the wheelchair he'd been confined to. The green-haired teen was fairly certain he'd have been able to move perfectly fine if he'd had a cane, but Recovery Girl, and then his mother, and then Tsu, had insisted. "My foot works just fine now and you will follow the doctor's orders." Tsu cut her cinnamon roll's protests short as quickly as she could, unfortunately causing him to wince at her tone. "It's for your own well-being. And please, think about how I feel. I really want you to get fully healed. And then we can, go on a date." Karo. While harsh, Tsu's words struck a chord in Izuku, pulling a smile from him. The green-haired teen had to remind himself that his well-being impacted someone else's happiness, besides his mother's, now, and he needed to act accordingly. "Okay," Izuku replied, locking eyes with his girlfriend as he acquiesced to her demand. "I'll stay in this thing." "You're right. Love." The small affectation was enough to melt Tsu into a puddle, simultaneously causing her heart to thud in her chest and a dopey smile to blossom across her blushing face. Almost as if directed by instinct, the frog girl leaned in and gave her lovable idiot a hug. The green duo found it surprisingly easy to ignore the catcalls and whistles they received from the rest of the class for their PDA. "Madraya! Asui!" Ida's stern shout chopped through the air just as vigorously as the noticeably uncomfortable speedster's arm did. "This is no place for that kind of behavior." The reprimand went unheeded as Izuku and Tsu continued their heartfelt embrace. Realizing he might be forced to physically separate the two, especially due to Izuku needing to uphold standards as the vice president, Ida took a step toward his fraternizing classmates. Only for Tay to step forward to intercept. GGRRRRR. The growl from the normally docile zombie was so menacing, Ida stopped dead in his tracks. Gulping down his sudden case of nerves, the stern teen turned to 1A's class president for support. Yarazu-san. Ida called out, doing his best to hide the quiver caused by Tay's glare. Isn't this a clear violation of the Academy's code of conduct? Please do something. Momo, who'd been engrossed in her phone while sitting next to Lily, looked up to see what the fuss was about. Even with her hearing still slightly impaired, the intelligent young woman quickly understood the gist of her classmates' concern after glancing at the verdant couple still sharing a tender hug. Well. Momo trailed off, failing to hide her slight annoyance at being interrupted during her shopping of a new dress for Lily. The actual wording of UA Code of Conduct does not expressly forbid the establishment of romantic relationships so long as no lascivious behavior is openly witnessed or any students involved suffer academically. Ida wanted to be incensed, allowed or not the behavior was unbecoming of an educational environment, but he'd reached an impasse. Instead of arguing the rules, which would have been unthinkable, the stern teen limited himself to strongly gesturing in the direction of the hugging pair. In response, Momo glanced at the two once more before leveling her bespectacled classmate with a deadpan stare. Are you saying you're truly feeling bothered by an innocent hug? Momo tried to keep any semblance of mockery from her tone, but she knew that her habit of covering her mouth with one hand when she was trying to hold in a laugh gave her true feelings away. Following their president's lead, most of 1A turned to Ida with looks of judgment. Momo's words weren't wrong. It wasn't as if the green duo were French kissing, or worse. What was there to fuss about? The speedster belatedly realized, once again, how foolish he was being for continuously assuming that UA would have the same expectations and regulations as his middle school. Even so, I'm not the only one. Desperate to prove he had some kind of point, Ida pointed his peers toward a distraught Okako, who looked at the newly formed couple through watery eyes and barely held back sniffling. Fortunately for all involved, whatever attention the distressed brunette would have gathered was lost when the room's door slid open. Aizawa entered his classroom for the first time since the events at the USJ, and many of the students noticed something different about the gruff pro-hero. He seemed livelier than ever before. Everyone, to your seats. The order was met with immediate and absolute obedience. The only case of reluctance came from one frog girl who lingered in the arms of her love for a half-second longer. As I'm sure you've been made aware, there will be no classes today, tomorrow, or for the next few days. Instead, this time will be used for a special type of instruction directly related to the incident you all experienced recently. The statement was met by acceptance and nods all around. Believing their time without schoolwork could be used as a vacation would have been stupid. Two of their number had been severely hurt, and others were still noticeably shaken by what they'd gone through. The students of 1A knew very well they needed help. Taking in the encouraging sight of his students' grave looks of acknowledgement, Aizawa turned and observed his beloved source of headaches and paperwork. His savior. Izuku, Midoriya, Aizawa called, failing to cover his slip of the tongue as well as he would have liked. Your presence is being requested at the principal's office. And no, you're not in trouble. Despite such reassurance, Izuku still had to swallow down a lump in his throat at the instructions he'd been given. For a monster like himself, there could be any number of scenarios awaiting him: an expulsion, suspension, demotion to another course track. All of these and more were within the realm of possibility as far as he was concerned. Since only the last option allowed him to continue attending UA where at least he could see his girlfriend every day, course receding is where the green-haired teen put all his hopes for the coming meeting. I understand, Izuku said, holding tight to a facade of confidence so as not to worry Izuku and his friends. Looking at the frog girl, the hero in training gave her a reassuring look. "I'll return shortly." The green-haired teen's comment, directed squarely at her, nailed Izuku to her chair. Those who didn't know the frog girl wouldn't have been able to tell, but she'd been just shy of standing and following her love to his fate. Knowing that making a scene wouldn't help anyone, 1A's amphibious student slumped in her seat. As Tay took control of Izuku's wheelchair and moved the green-haired teen toward the door, Aizawa unconsciously raised a hand to ruffle his problem child's hair. The gruff underground hero needed his student to understand he had nothing to fear from this visit to Nezu, that he truly deserved to be called a hero. Then his reaching hand was slapped away by the dark-haired zombie girl. "Gralaga." Tay's warning groan, as opposed to being unintelligible, seemed to almost be a concerted effort to mask speech. More than one observer of the confrontation between teacher and undead was surprised. "Tay, I wasn't trying to steal him from you." Aizawa found it was impossible not to respond to the zombie girl's blatant flippancy. Her insinuation was too insulting. By the time the gruff teacher realized the rest of those watching couldn't understand the undead's words, it was too late to take back his own. "Izun is ours," Lily chirped, suddenly joining the fray. The littlest zombie skipped to position herself in front of the wheelchair, causing Izuku to bury his head in his hands in embarrassment. "So we'll be the ones to protect him." Back at her seat, Izuku face-palmed at what she and her classmates were witnessing. Why had she ever considered her cinnamon roll defenseless when he had two zombies, and now an underground hero, ready and willing to keep him safe? Unfortunately, around the frog girl, the rest of 1A seemed ready to begin a whole new round of gossip regarding the green-haired teen. To tackle such an issue before it became one, Aizawa addressed his students as soon as the door had closed behind Izuku and the two zombies. "Before anyone thinks about spreading rumors concerning mind control or quirk misuse," the pro-hero started, fixing the remaining members of 1A with a rather intense glare, "you should know I suffered a potentially fatal wound during the USJ assault, and it was under my direct order that your classmate used his quirk to heal me." Most of his students gasped at such a revelation, although Aizawa noticed a few glaring exceptions. Asui had obviously been aware of this fact, so her lack of outward reaction was to be expected. The looks of comprehension and understanding from Jiro, Yaozu, and Tokoyami were appreciated. The three clearly trusted his decision was the best course of action at the time. It was Ojiro's pinched glare that gave Aizawa pause and set alarm bells ringing in his mind. "Obviously, I won't be able to function with my normal impartiality for a time," Aizawa continued, quietly hoping his acknowledgement of the situation would give pause to any other negative reactions. "That being said, during this time that you have neither classes nor a teacher, I will still be leaving an assignment for you to complete." There was more than one groan at this news, but another stern glare from the underground hero settled those students right down. In fact, that there were so many determined expressions looking back at him instead of disgruntled actually surprised the gruff teacher. It was almost as if many of 1A actually desired something to focus on during their 2-week hiatus. "The first day we are back on schedule, each of you will be expected to turn in an essay centering on your own actions during the USJ incident," Aizawa revealed. "Start with the choices you made, their consequences good and bad, and what you perceive you need to improve in yourselves in order to prevent the adverse ones from occurring in the future." Izuku sank down at her desk, not because she felt that the task was a massive waste of time or unduly forcing her and her classmates to revisit their trauma, but because she and Izuku had already completed it. To be fair, her boyfriend had actually compiled an extensive document cataloging every possible detail imaginable that he could remember. Already it was quite a temptation to copy it to get herself some extra points. "Now, to the reason you're all here today," Aizawa said, finally calling attention to the elephant in the room that was weighing down so heavily on those present. "Starting today, you'll all begin attending specially designed occupational therapy. It'll go for the rest of the week, and it's on the same level as what Pro Heroes receive. There were no cheers, no outcries, no blusterings of toughness or fortitude. Instead, solemn nods and grateful expressions were what greeted Aizawa's announcement. And if some members of 1A were internally skeptical, then they put that aside for now. No one could argue the fact that their class as a whole needed help dealing with what had happened. For today only, your sessions will be held in the groups that you were separated into at that time of the assault. This is in the hope that you can find support in those you fought beside and bonded with, Aizawa explained. The news earned a rare smile here and there, those who felt unable to express themselves alone feeling relieved. Starting tomorrow, individual sessions will begin and continue for the rest of the week. The entirety of the following week has been given to you as free time to heal in any healthy way you see fit. As Aizawa continued into the finer points of their sessions and how they'd work, some began to feel the stirrings of guilt. She really didn't want to spend her therapy time with Kaminari. Instead she'd have preferred nursing her boyfriend back to full health, mentally as well as physically. Nezu's office. The first thing Izuku noticed upon being wheeled into the principal's office was not that All Might and Detective Tsukaki were also unexpectedly present, but that all three adults were directing kind smiles his way. The green-haired teen tried to speak, to unload the burden that was eating him up inside, but a raised hand paw from Nezu silenced him. The very first thing you need to know, Midoriya-kun, is that you are not a murderer. The emphasized assertion struck Izuku deep, lifting a weight that had been crushing his soul. If he hadn't been in the presence of three adults of significant importance, he thought he might have just floated away. Beside the green-haired teen, Tae and Lily stood silently, observing their master's emotional roller coaster and staying ready to offer their help if needed. Here, Tsukaki said, handing the still reeling Izuku a manila folder. You'll want to read this as well. Please remember that while we all agreed it would be cruel to withhold this information from you, it is still confidential. Nezu picked up with an amicable tone, beaming at the teary smile of relief that had grown on Midoriya's face as he opened the folder. The beastly villain you defeated was in actuality a victim of a horrendous experiment. He'd had so many quirks smashed together inside of him that his body could hardly tolerate it. As the words of the quirked animal flowed over him, Izuku continued to read the documents he held in his hands. He took extra notice of the numerous mentions of a lack of humanity presented in the villain, who in each progressive photograph looked more and more like a bioweapon than a person. And that says nothing in regards to his mind, Nezu continued, noticing how the green-haired teen was breathing easier now. The damage he received from you only paralyzed him, but he was nearly brain dead long before he stepped foot into the USJ. Izuku sighed in relief, already in a much better mood, as morbid as that thought was. He hadn't killed or maimed someone, only crippled an unfortunate monster born of some scientist's madness. As of now, the being known as Namu is being held in a special block of Tartarus, Nezu finished up. There, he'll be studied in the hopes he or his physiology might contain some clue as to who perpetrated such crimes against him. Having read all the information that was pertinent to him, Izuku handed the manila folder back to Tsukaki. It was a lot to take in, but the green-haired teen's analytical mind was already blazing into action. I see, Izuku said as he vacillated between the wonderful idea of not being a murderer and thoughts of the beastly Namu. Was there any permanent damage? The innocent question was by nature well intended, Nezu was sure of that, but the quirked animal immediately had the desire to stress that his student's concern was rather misplaced. The villain had been more of a beast than a man for a long time after all. One wouldn't think so, given the hyper-regeneration quirk observed. Tsukaki replied instead, raising a hand to stop any further questions. However, since Namu didn't seem to have much of a mind of his own to begin with, there hasn't really been anything observably lost by him missing a chunk of brain. The three adults watching noticed the exact instant the last of Izuku's tension left him. They also noticed when Tae began to pat his shoulder and Lily hugged one of his arms in comfort and support shortly after. So, Izuku could hardly force the words out, he was so close to sobbing. His eyes were already pouring tears shamelessly. I can still be a hero? The trembling question snagged on the good moods of the three adults present, two of which found it hard to swallow that the teen even now would doubt his heroic worth. The third of the trio. Of that there was never any doubt. Young Midoriya, All Might, suddenly boomed, jumping to his feet. Nezu winced at the abrupt and high-volume shout while Tsukaki stifled a roll of the eyes at his friend's fervor. You are one who has time and again shown what being a hero is all about, what heroes should aspire to be. To Izuku, the veritable wave of energy that was All Might's passion nearly drove him deeper into his wheelchair. The green-haired teen was still a little hesitant to believe the number one hero's speech, however. He seriously doubted anyone would look at him and feel inspired. Beside their master, both Day and Lily eyed the symbol of peace with flat looks, neither convinced nor amused at the muscular man's antics. If anything, All Might pressed on, giant shoulders unexpectedly sagging as his once resonant voice hollowed out, "It is I who needs to re-examine his will to be a hero." "What?" Izuku shouted, confused and shocked at All Might's words. Now the number one hero really wasn't making any sense to the green-haired teen. While observing the man and teen as they fumbled around each other, Nezu watched on as curiously, Tay's head tilted to the side, as if cocked in understanding and processing what was being said. The quirked animal made a quick mental note of the odd behavior before becoming distracted by the goofy faces Lily was sending his way, obviously wanting someone to pay her some attention. The principal obliged with a stuck-out tongue and puffed-out cheeks. Heroes are meant to endure in the worst conditions on the battlefield, and when working with others put teamwork first, even if there's no chance for lengthy communication. All Might explained his position, intent on making it clear to the young man before him that he was not in any way at fault. Not only did my weakness allow the Namu to escape my grasp, but my hesitancy at your actions directly resulted in your near death. I should have known what you were trying to do with your quirk, trusted you even if I hadn't, and not let my guard down against such a threat. The praise and humility from his childhood idol was an overpowering balm to Izuku's soul. The green-haired teen felt the stirrings of a true smile pressing at his lips, the first since he'd fully realized what he'd done to the Namu. But there's something else that I need to confess, Izuku revealed with a wavering voice. He wasn't sure how to put his problem into words, though, how to ask for help. I let something dark guide my thoughts at one point. I wanted to. I had to eliminate. The once peaceful and relieved atmosphere that had suffused the room was swallowed up by the anxiety and anguish radiating from the green-haired teen. Izuku felt as if at any moment he'd fly apart. He didn't want that dark side of himself to surface again, but everything he'd ever read or studied said ignoring it would only spell trouble for the future. The three adults in the room exchanged glances, each unsure of how to word their opinion on the matter. It would come as a surprise to the teen before them, but what he was describing happened more often than he realized. It is a grim reality, but what you experienced is just a part of fighting evil. Midoriya-san, Tsukaki spoke first, feeling as if he had more personal experience with what Izuku was trying to describe. He himself knew what it was like to have to resist pulling the trigger to put a definitive end to some of the darker villains out there. Both heroes and cops face the exact same thoughts whenever someone or something endangers those we care about. Really? Izuku asked in shock, the detective's assurances oddly making him feel slightly less apprehensive. So feeling that way doesn't make me evil? The adults shared pained smiles at the hesitant question. Unlike the situation with Bakugo, they knew better than to judge such a character flaw so early in a student's development. Especially when said student was clearly and viscerally repentant. Midoriya-kun, neither your quirk nor your disposition to protect others should ever be considered evil out of turn. Nezu took the chance to speak his mind now. The quirked animal knew, after extensive research into the green-haired teen's background, just how much self-hatred the kid held. It is the nature of the intent behind our actions that determines the alignment of our persona. Even today, soldiers still exist. They kill, but by and large they are not evil at heart. For the second time since entering the principal's office, Izuku was sent reeling. He could almost feel his mind attempting to expand its conceptualization of morality, on what needed to be done, and what had to be done. Perhaps a change of perspective would young Midoriya some good? All might's sudden suggestion pulled the green-haired teen right out of his musings. Seeing that the symbol of peace had graciously redirected the conversation to the other reason the four of them, plus zombies, had gathered, Nezu once more took the reins. I couldn't have said it better myself. Midoriya-kun, we also called you here for another purpose, the quirked animal said, glad to see he'd easily been able to catch the full attention of his student. The detective here would like to offer you an invitation. You and your partners both, I mean. Tsukaki, if you please. Of course, the detective agreed, smiling congenially at the green-haired teen. Izuku Midoriya, after your mandatory week of counseling, and for the remainder of your allotted free time before 1A's classes resume, I would like to personally invite you to intern at my department. If Izuku was forced to take any more shocks that day, he was sure even with his quirk, his heart would give out. Equal measures of elation and fear shot through his veins as he processed what the detective was offering. On one hand, being recognized, by the police no less, felt great. On the other, the whole idea felt too much like a nudge to abandon so the academy could avoid further problems for him to feel comfortable. Seeing that the green-haired teen was at a loss for words, and that his face was rapidly changing between a rosy blush and a sickly pallor, Tsukaki could only guess at what his potential intern was thinking. Fortunately, he was good at such guessing. It would be purely extracurricular, of course, the detective continued, carefully modulating his voice to make it clear this was an offer earned, not being forced. And you'd be under my direct supervision. Think of it as an opportunity to train your quirk in new ways and use it while also doing some good for society. Nezu nodded to Tsukaki's words, more than willing to pull a few more of his students' strings if it were for the teen's own benefit. And there was no doubt in the quirked animal's highly intelligent mind that Izuku would thrive under the detective's tutelage. And don't forget Midoriya-kun, understanding the job of the authorities as a pro-hero is one thing, Nezu added, before hamming up looking contrite. But this academy can only teach so much about the actual inner workings of a CSI department. Seeing as how you seem to prefer the intellectual approach over the physical, I would highly suggest you consider taking this chance to learn the ins and outs of criminology and forensics from the pros. The combined efforts of the detective and principal were too much for Izuku's trepidation, and the green-haired teen's concern about being pushed out of it dissolved into a significant, grateful smile. The hero in training finally accepted that he was truly being offered something great. I understand, Izuku replied, mind already turning to thoughts of what tools the internship would add to his approach to heroism. I accept the offer, thank you. Tae and Lily nodded along with the words of their master. The idea that their beloved Izuku was taking another step in having a less direct approach to things sitting well with them. The green-haired teen himself was cognizant of the fact that this opportunity was a good way to keep his promise to his girlfriend. Izuku knew the frog girl would probably kick his ass if he ever allowed himself so close to death's door again, so this was a good step away from that. Then it's settled. Nezu's cheerful exclamation seemed to wash away all of the dark thoughts and worries that had been suffocating the room. All present were glad that Izuku would remain a student whose only stigma was the use of undead as partners. Now then, you may return to the therapy session being held for your USGA group. Since that particular group also involved Asui-san, I've asked if it could be suspended until you returned so that you might support each other. The principal's statement, accompanied by a not at all subtle wink, caused Izuku to blush so furiously he could have rivaled a tomato. Of course there'd been cameras in the nurse's office. Of course their declaration of love had been recorded. And of course, it wasn't like they wanted their relationship to be kept a secret anyway. Speaking of which, All Might cut in, once more belting out his words at the top of his lungs. The symbol of peace leapt in front of the green-haired teen before Tay could wheel him out the door, taking out of his pocket what appeared to be tickets of some sort. "Here. Take these. It's the least I can offer as a means of apology for how my failures affected you." All Might extended his gift out to Izuku so the teen could take them, but Lily beat her master to the punch, snatching the small squares of printed cardstock with her tiny hands. Nezu wasn't the only one who noticed the zealous look of protection in the littlest zombie's eyes. It was as if the brunette had to be absolutely sure that the very symbol of peace himself had no chance of posing a threat to her master. "Those are VIP passes to a local theme park," All Might continued without missing a beat, doing his best to bury his disappointment and hurt at Lily's actions. "I'm sure you and your girlfriend will be able to make the most of them." "Thank you so much, sir," Izuku replied, a full-blown smile brightening his face. He felt incredible. Such a concerted show of support felt like a true blessing from the gods. With no more business keeping them there, the green-haired teen and his zombies left the principal's office. Finally able to relax, All Might allowed himself to deflate into his emaciated form. "That was harder than I thought it'd be," Toshinori sighed, pinching the bridge of his bony nose. "And you're sure it was a good idea to lie to him like that?" "Technically, it wasn't a lie," Tsukaki countered, knowing full well that while the Namu was officially brain dead now, it was almost better than his previous state of being a mindless puppet. "I'm more worried about this beast being proof that he's returning after all this time. It would be for the best if we did our best to keep Midoriya as far from involved as possible," Nezu added, joining the two men's conversation. "Speaking of, what of your successor Tashi?" Toshinori sighed again, thoughts of the weight he was being forced to place on the young blonde's shoulders still tormenting him. It was just, "He's not ready." The three simple words stilled the room, their despondent truth throwing a chill on the celebratory mood straightening out Midoriya's situation had left. "But," Toshinori gritted out, feeling cornered now that his nemesis had shown his hand, "but there's no more time. The boy will inherit my quirk. And my burden. Today. A hero of heroes, an academy principal, and a detective, united in purpose, all nodded as one at the gravity of the words spoken. They'd hoped for a better scenario, one where young Tagata wouldn't inherit such a burden until after his graduation. But this was the reality of their situation. War was coming. Nezu's office, later that evening. The sun had long since descended as Nezu looked over the files of the 1A students, all of them updated with the preliminary reports from the group therapies. The information generally amounted to nothing more than superficial analyses of course, and would therefore only be used as the basis for the individual counseling sessions. Still, what he read made the quirked animal grimace all the same. I had truly wished that this wouldn't have come up so early for them, and as a result of such a crisis, Nezu muttered to himself as he appraised what the talks had revealed. The first group of interest had been, unsurprisingly, comprised of Midoriya, Asui, Kaminari, and Uraraka. After some thought, the Ida boy's file had been included in the batch as well due to his otherwise early departure as a result of the group's effort. The electric quirk user had made it plain from the beginning that he left all of the planning during their time in the flood zone to Asui, citing overwhelming nerves. The blonde had admitted to being unable to think of anything useful in that time, and had vehemently stated that he'd gone along with the frog girl's strategy to take down the aquatic villains that had surrounded them. From Hound Dog's notes, Nezu wouldn't have needed to have been in the room to pick up just how intimidated by the young Asui the boy had been and still was. Assurances aside, Nezu had known from Electric Teen's admittance that he wouldn't be shining in the courage department without experiencing the serious training I provided, so there was no doubt in the quirked animal's mind that the frog girl had given her classmate a little push to follow her plan. Since it had been the logical thing to do, and successful in the end, no further action was planned for the young Asui in relation to that. The next in the group to speak, Uraraka, had been noted as originally being reticent to divulge any useful information, although between her teary eyes and the broken voice hound dog, would have had issues regardless. In the end, the counselor had been able to piece together that the brunette believed herself weak and undeserving, as good a place to start as any. The hound hero had capped the girl's file with multiple recorded instances where the rosy-cheeked teen had stolen glances at Midoriya, before throwing a glare at Asui each time afterward. The second Ida-san's entry was, as short as expected. The stern teen had limited himself to one question regarding Midoriya's methods, and upon receiving a guarantee from Hound Dog that everything had been above board, had left it at that. Nezu hadn't been able to help but feel relieved after having read that portion of the file. He'd feared the brother of Ingenium would have henceforth boxed the green-haired teen into his own preconceived notions of good and evil, previous bonding experiences notwithstanding. Young Asui's responses boiled down to one simple goal: find Midoriya and go from there. The frog girl had shown remarkable fortitude in keeping herself together while supporting the green-haired teen, but her tunnel vision concerning him had proven to be something that needed further study. Perhaps it was a lasting effect of her healing? Midoriya, however, had taken the cake. Not only had the green-haired teen provided an enormous accounting for himself, but he'd also submitted a mountain of information on everyone else as well. Maybe I should consider claiming the boy as my successor? Nezu pondered as he flipped through the dozen or so pages Hound Dog had been forced to transcribe and condense, from the ramblings of the impossibly intelligent teen. According to the summary of Midoriya's evaluation, the attack had been so poorly planned that, had one been even a fraction more cohesive in their thinking, the students themselves would have been able to take down and arrest every one of the villains without even needing a teacher. 7 whole pages after that had been dedicated to strategies. That implied an intimate knowledge of at least how the rest of his classmates acted and where their strengths lay. Following that, and most importantly, Midoriya had taken care to highlight perceived weaknesses of his classmates. The details contained within this section were startlingly accurate in the quirked animal's opinion, and he'd had to make a mental note to add the green-haired teen's own reports to the documents being compiled for the individual counseling sessions. Compared to all of that, the other groups had comported themselves more or less as expected. Yaozu and Jiro had immediately demanded a restraining order on Minato for his actions, and the boy had retaliated with disparaging remarks against the young women for attacking him at the start of their confrontation with the villains. The group consisting of Tokoyami, Koda, and Aoyama had devolved, once again as Hound Dog discovered, into a storm of apologies. The avian teen had reluctantly accepted more than a few of these regrets before putting his foot down. Todoroki had been a slight surprise when he'd expressed guilt for overreacting in his quirk usage. He'd believed his effort to protect his 3 classmates, Shoji, Sero, and Sato spat in the face of their own strength and skills. However, the heterochromatic's words had been brushed off by the trio of males, who'd been more grateful than anything. And then there'd been the Ruin Zone group. Nezu had to stop and take a moment, rubbing his eyes before once more going over the reaction Hound Dog had received from Hagakure of all students as a result of asking the invisible girl how she felt. The poor girl had burst into tears and loudly sobbed as she'd admitted to what she'd felt throughout the entire ordeal. Initially shocked speechless, Ashido and Kirishima had reportedly leapt to their friend's aid, offering hugs and words of encouragement and support. The Pinkette had even gone as far as to call her invisible bestie twice as courageous as herself for facing down such fear in the middle of the hostage situation they'd found themselves in. That Ojiro kept himself distant and remained largely uncooperative the entire time was almost just as concerning as Hagakure's overly visceral response. It could have been so much worse, Nezu said as he finished reading over the report, unsure if he was stating fact or trying to make himself feel better. The grim truth was undeniable: a good half of the students of 1A required serious therapy. And the single week they'd been given might not be enough for some. The quirked animal switched gears, and considered another troubling revelation of the group counseling, The adorable and seemingly innocent Lily had been largely unaffected by the whole mess. The savagery of her final actions had in no way been hidden or downplayed by either Yaozu or Jiro, but to ask the zombie girl, it had been an acceptable, albeit regretful, course of action at the time. To her, she'd simply needed to get to Madrya by any means necessary. And here I was hoping to find some respite in all this. Nezu quipped to the empty office. The principal of UA knew that, though the assault on his academy was over now, the battle had just begun. The media was already demanding there be an official press conference so the public could have an explanation on what exactly had happened and why it had happened. While that in itself would be extremely unpleasant, the quirked animal was thankful that, at the very least, thanks to the efforts of Tsukaki and Baruasui, they'd managed to dodge quite the deadly bullet already. For now, Izuku would be safe from both exposure to the media and being pinned for a crime that's very validity was murky at best. The sudden ringing of Nezu's desk phone filled him with no small amount of dread. Just the same, the quirked animal answered the infernal device. "Hello?" Nezu spoke with his best disarming voice, believing it better to start off charming than combative in most situations. The principal's normally beady eyes shot to the size of dinner plates as he took in what was being said, and his fur stood on end. "What? You found Takeo?" For the first time in a long while, Nezu felt his heart swell with good news. Finally, a long-standing circle could be closed, and he would at long last be able to reunite his best friend with his child. Magnus, for those that think I have a bias toward Izuku and Tsu. Well, of course. What else did you expect? Chapter 16 A Sinister Date. Principal Nezu. Is it true that a student in the heroics course nearly caused the hypothermic death to over a half-dozen people? It wasn't that the question was improper or entirely fabricated that grated on the already tested nerves of UA long-standing head, causing him to bear a constrained grin many failed to realize was his version of a snarl. It was the fact that too many like it had already been asked over the course of the press conference. The media had unfortunately exceeded their expectations. Any and every opportunity to paint the victims of the USJ assault, his students, had been and was being taken. I believe the situation involving the students caught in the conflagration zone has been explained, Nezu answered, turning his piercing gaze to the reporter who'd taken another shot at twisting the truth to paint a more horrific picture than the press had received. Has the New Japan Times lowered its quality so far they're willing to send incompetent journalists to cover major incidents now? The man who'd thrown the accusatory question stepped back, face puckered as the barb sunk deeply into his pride. Before another troublemaker could try their luck, the short but imposing figure of Baruasui cleared her throat, the reverberating noise impressively deep enough to cause a lull in the chatter of the gathered crowd facing her and the two UA spokesmen, Nezu and Aizawa. If what you all are still incessantly asking about is whether or not the students of UA who were facing a life-and-death situation, purposefully used lethal force in response. The Asui matriarch trailed off, shrewd eyes flicking from reporter to journalist. Those in attendance waited with bated breath, the famed frog woman's words tantamount to the figurative final say. Then rest assured they did not. The ensuing explosion of whispers and grumbling allowed Nezu and Aizawa a moment to collect themselves. They'd been at this for hours already, and it was taking every bit of situational and social acumen they had to keep the vultures circling around them from sniffing out the truth, the much darker and disturbing truth. And what about now? A brave, or stupid, young woman with a notebook full of scribbles asked as the crowd noise eventually died down. How can the public be sure exposure to such violence hasn't caused detrimental effects to the students' mentalities? What if they snap? Unable to hold his peace any longer, Aizawa reached out and grabbed the table mix sitting in front of him. The sight of the normally reserved and prickly Eraserhead willingly offering information caused an instant, heavy silence to fall over the baying press. If she wasn't still cross with the man, Baru would have been slightly envious. It would be the height of irrationality to expect teens, no matter how skilled or mature, to come out of an event like the assault on the USJ without trauma, the gruff man said solemnly. As such, UA has already enrolled the entirety of Class 1A into Pro Hero level therapy. Whether it was due to Eraserhead being the one to deliver the news, not wanting to interrupt the rarity of hearing the underground hero speak openly, or being too stunned at the proactive move to think of how to twist it to their advantage, the horde known as the press remained silent. I won't lie and say these sessions will fix everything, only an idiot would believe that kind of ruse, Aizawa sighed, making sure his genuine taking a moment was clear to see before continuing. But they are the only way we can do right by our students after failing them so completely. Miraculously, a reporter simultaneously gained the ability to exhibit manners and raised his hand instead of belting out another question. Blinking slowly at the odd sight, Aizawa nodded in the man's direction. For those here and at home unfamiliar with Pro Hero therapy, what do these sessions usually entail? Glancing at Nezu for a moment, only for the quirked animal to subtly nod his head, Aizawa grumbled before accepting that his uncharacteristically impulsive move had locked him into the role of press handler for now. At least he didn't have to worry about his dry eye or chronic fatigue, at the moment thanks to Izuku, Midoriya. After an initial group session, students have been separated for individual counseling, where UA Emergency Counseling Office 5. Why do I get the unsettling impression that you see yourself as a monster, Midoriya-san? Akane had known that she and her co-workers hadn't been given an easy task. Trying to get teenagers to talk about their thoughts and feelings was difficult enough on a good day, but after something like the attack on New.A.U.SJ facility, they'd only known to be prepared for anything. And she'd thought she had been. But this kid, Izuku Midoriya? After only 15 minutes, she was seriously worried. It was hard to decide what had her more incredulously distressed, the fact that a person who by all appearances and description, was a sweetheart who had always done his best to protect and save others held on to such a debilitating self-image, or the knowledge that it was their society that had caused it. Is it that obvious? Izuku asked in return, raising an arm to rub the back of his neck. I mean, what else am I supposed to think? I can't use my quirk without something terrible happening afterwards, and tragedy follows me wherever I go. Tsunmori had made note of many of what Midoriya called tragedies earlier, the events that he refused to fully forgive himself for. The hijacking of Teyamada's body after failing to save her, mistakenly ordering Lily Hoshikawa to relive her harrowing final moments, and assuming quirk-related control of first his girlfriend and then his teacher under duress were only the most glaring and recent of these. Honestly, it was a wonder the kid hadn't fallen apart by now. Midoriya-san, Tsunmori said, drawing her green-haired patient's attention from whatever self-made hell he was torturing himself with, surely you know of someone who sees you as a good person. Originally feeling a little out of her depth at the sheer size of the mental minefield she'd had thrust upon her, the young therapist had decided that finding an external anchor for the troubled teen before her would be a good first step. Someone who saw and treated him positively could stand as a marker to adjust his own skewed self-perceptions against. The contemplative look that sank into the green-haired teen's countenance didn't raise Tsunmori's hopes, however. Izuku appeared to struggle with finding an answer, when the hitherto silent zombie girl suddenly groaned in support. You're right, Tae-chan, there's Mom of course. And Tsu-chan. Izuku's musing was accompanied by wide-eyed realization. Tsu-chan. Maybe I'm not, if someone like her. If she can love me. Normally, Tsunmori could watch on as her patients cried out whatever emotion overtook them during a session calmly and impartially. Normally, the pure and unabashed happiness and relief looking back at her didn't feel like a knife to her heart. Yes, Izuku Midoriya might have been far from fully recovered from the USJ attack and a lifetime of adversity and discrimination, but as the green-haired teen gave his accompanying zombie girl a shaky hug, Tsunmori concluded that the boy had at least finally started walking on the right path. UA press conference. That's not to say our only focus is the fallout of the attack, Aizawa clarified, stopping to take a swig of water from the bottle by his mic, unused to speaking for so long. We've also taken the initiative to examine our students' actions, and where deemed appropriate, ask the counselors to probe further. The surrounding reporters and journalists seemed unsure of how to process so much freely given information, especially from an underground best known for treating them like the plague. It was slightly disconcerting to those who'd had years of experience as the dogs of the media. Meanwhile, their younger compatriots were spooked by their elders' collective unease. Nezu breathed a slight sigh of relief. The Asui matriarch's stratagem of herding the crowd to push Aizawa's buttons until the usually quiet man spoke up of his own accord had finally worked. The quirked animal hated manipulating his teachers like this. It felt too much like the experiments those monsters masquerading as scientists had forced on him, but there were few tactics even he, with high spec, had been able to put together that would have worked nearly as well. Maybe he'd give the gruff man a few days off as an apology? The moment of reprieve came to an end when an older woman holding a tablet stepped forward. Her hesitance to speak was clear, but the bland look Aizawa gave her was neither dismissive nor confrontational, so she coughed once, to break the silence, and spoke up. Mr. Eraserhead, what kind of actions would warrant as attention? Were there students who acted outside acceptable behavior? That got a reaction. The red-eyed glare directed at the woman cowed what little bravery she'd managed to scrape up, and she shrank back under the weight of the underground hero's judgment. Snorting at the journalist's weak condemnatory audacity, Aizawa leaned back before speaking again. Outside acceptable behavior? What a litigious way of saying taking liberties. All you need to know is that when push came to shove, the students of 1A didn't stand around and ask themselves, UA Emergency Counseling Office 2. Why Midoriya-san, Asui-san? What made reaching him so important? Why not, say, Todoroki-san or Yaozu-san? Mika Shimatsuki, once more, examined the decisions of the young woman before her. Asui had showed amazing mental fortitude throughout their session, taking the crisis she and her classmates had suffered rather well, especially after ensuring her newly minted boyfriend had gotten out of danger. Principal Nezu had been concerned about her tunnel vision regarding the green-haired teen, however, fearing it could be a lasting effect of the largely unknown quirk of the resident, for lack of a better term, necromancer. Stickler for the rules that she was, Shimatsuki was going to make sure she covered every possible angle before turning in her first report on the amphibious teen. Because I love him, Sa answered calmly, words ringing with her honesty. She saw no reason to mask her feelings here. She was sure the dark-haired brunette sitting opposite her had heard such stories before. It wasn't unheard of for pro-heroes after all. I think I loved him even before the training incident actually. And I knew he'd act impulsively to save me if I didn't do something. Shimatsuki nodded as she listened to the now familiar answer, noting down the frog girl's ironclad insistence that her feelings were real and established before the assault occurred. If these responses showed no sign of changing by the week, then the bun-headed therapist was confident she could assuage her current employer's fears quite handedly. But also, Tsu spoke again, pulling Shimatsuki's attention from her thoughts. The older woman's naturally wine-colored eyes snapped to her patient. I didn't and still don't trust Todoroki-san or Yamamo. Not to take the lead in the kind of situation we were in at least. A thin eyebrow raised in professional curiosity at such a blunt statement. According to records, both Todoroki-san and Yaozu-san are exemplar students with high intellect and powerful quirks, Shimatsuki said slowly, testing the waters. This might have been it, the moment the frog girl either slipped and revealed a hidden truth or finally gave a proper explanation for her behavior. Going by that, either seem like equal or even superior choices to partner with. I wouldn't go so far as to say Midoriya-san isn't intelligent or capable in his own right, his track record speaks for itself, but to me, he just doesn't seem the optimal pick. Instantly, Shimatsuki found herself the recipient of a cold and unblinking stare. The frog girl's visible judgment was disconcerting, not to mention unbelievably discomforting. The bun-headed therapist swallowed as silently as she could. Would you elaborate on your reasoning, please? Thankfully for her professional pride, Shimotsuki was able to keep her voice from wavering. She wasn't able to suppress the feeling of her skin crawling at the frigidness being directed at her, however. You weren't there, Su stated simply after a minute more of staring. She ignored the sigh of relief from the older woman across from her. At the most critical moment, those two failed to act. Izuku-kun, he didn't. I made my choice, and I still stand by it. Shimotsuki was no fool. She'd read the reports just as all of her co-workers had. Class 1A's recommendation students had shown some of their shortcomings for sure, shortcomings that could be forgiven as they were only first years. But the complete faith in Midrayo weighing the amphibious teen's every word was surprising. Thankfully, it didn't sound manipulated, forced, or artificially engendered in the least. No, Asui might have a case of tunnel vision when it came to her boyfriend, but the green-haired teen might have just deserved it. UA press conference. Asui had a headache. Scratch that. The powerful throbbing behind her eyes right above her sinuses definitely qualified as a migraine at this point. And there was still an hour of this press conference left. The stern woman had never missed having her staff handle the media as much as she did now. Over the course of the conference, the gathered men and women had proven themselves exhaustive and utterly hell-bent on finding any hint of impropriety or wrongdoing on UA part so as to have a reason to castigate the academy. It was maddening. She might have still been upset beyond belief with the staff of the school at the moment, but even she acknowledged that it was a large part of what kept their society as peaceful as it was. The fevered pitch of attempts to twist, and even fabricate, events to cast a negative light on the academy were almost more than she and her initial response team had planned to face. Almost. Allowing Eraserhead a moment to rest his voice, the man had spoken the praises of his students' decisions far longer than even the Asui matriarch had expected. The frog woman grabbed her own mic and pulled it forward. Once again, the roiling noise of the crowd died down in anticipation of her words. Baru expertly held the expectant silence a moment longer, reminding the reporters and journalists why there were many reasons she was one of the most feared women in Japan, not an active pro-hero or villain. While Principal Nezu and Eraserhead's words have all been more than truthful so far, we must acknowledge the fact that these were high school students involved in the assault, not adults, Baru stated flatly. It was a fact that the press seemed to always forget when UA was in the news for less than pleasant reasons. Their quirks are still growing, as are their understandings of their full abilities and limits. Now, are there any questions that aren't thinly veiled attempts at painting UA or its students as potential villain risks? A single beat of silence. That's all the frog woman's reprimanding granted before the cacophony started up again. Asui-san. Is it true that students were taken hostage during the crisis? How did they make it out alive? It wasn't the best segue, but Baru would take it. Watching the Asui matriarch take command of the crowd, Nezu was thankful once again the fearsome woman had agreed to lend her aid to his school. Her ability to direct the attention of the ravenous press to where she wanted it, or at least away from where she didn't, was masterful. And much appreciated. There were many things the assault on the USJ had brought to light, besides his and his staff's foolish complacency, and one he'd rather keep out of the public's eye for as long as possible was the underlying tensions that had sprouted up in 1A. Those would need to be dealt with internally before there was a chance of them being used to their enemy's advantage. UA Emergency Counseling Office 8. Ojiro couldn't have been having a worse day. The black-haired man sitting across from him had been resolute in pursuing a line of questioning that, while the tailed teen objectively knew was important, wasn't pleasant for him. Explaining himself wasn't something he wanted to do, but the martial artist teen wasn't sure how his therapy had turned into this, but since he was here now, there didn't seem to be any option but to cooperate. Moving on couldn't happen without opening up, he supposed. Ojiro-san, please. I would like to help you, But if you don't explain, I will have a difficult time doing so, the therapist maintained. The black-haired man carted a hand through the large bang that divided his face in two, allowing the tailed teen to realize he had a prosthetic left arm, or at least, hand. Now, why do you hate Izuku Midoriya? Ojiro bit back his initial snap response, knowing it'd be no help here. It seemed he had no choice, especially if he wanted to clarify this misunderstanding. Genoza-san. I don't hate Midoriya-san, Ojiro replied with a heavy sigh, the tension that had kept his shoulders stiff suddenly slacking. I hate his quirk. When no answer came from the man sitting across from him, the martial artist looked up. The gaze staring back at him was one filled with patient and encouraging question. 2 years ago, my master lost her title to a challenger with a similar quirk. He took control of a student during the bout. Reliving the memory again caused familiar pain to lance through Ojiro's heart, and he grimaced at the ache. The coward used the student as a shield, forcing my master into an impossible situation. She was all but forced to lose. On the pad in his hands, Nobuchika Genoza made a separate note to check into this master, of his patience. There was something the teen still wasn't telling him, though it was clear that he wasn't describing a villain attack. At least he was finally making some progress. Witnessing Midoriya-san hide behind the corpse of that poor girl was difficult to accept at first, but I might have been able to get over it with time. Ojiro trailed off, breathing slowly as he worked through the cumulative emotions that had clouded his thoughts for so long. But then he took control of one of my classmates, intentional or not. And I know he didn't take advantage of her, but still. And the fact that his actions were to save Asui-san from death? Genoza cut in, glad that he'd been given a route to show his patient the reality he seemed to be unable to accept. Or that your teacher, and most likely you as, well, only survived the USJ assault because he used his quirk? Can you ignore these truths? Ojiro winced, tensing up again at the gentle chastisement. His tail twitched in a rather aggressive manner. No. I acknowledge his involvement carried the day, Ojiro replied, continuing before Genoza could feel they'd made headway. But I'm also aware that my homeroom teacher is now in danger of becoming Midoriya's puppet if he's not properly supervised. Genoza kept his sigh to himself. It looked like he had a lot of work left to do with the tailed teen. UA press conference. As the Asui matriarch continued to skillfully lead the enraptured reporters and journalists through the separate events of the USJ assault, highlighting some and glossing over others, Nezu took a moment to think over the reports from his students' group sessions once more. The quirked animal found his thoughts again drawn to the disturbing report of the one student who had truly acted negatively during the attack. Allowing a little of high-spec to activate, the principal felt his stomach clench as his impressive memory couldn't recall any positive notes being made on the teen in question either. Aizawa himself had only marked down a hint of potential shown during his traditional quirk apprehension test, the barest needed to avoid expulsion. How had such a cretin made their way into his academy? Were Aizawa's findings regarding Aldra only the tip of the iceberg? Had other schools been fabricating whole files for their applicants in a bid to heighten their own esteem? It sickened him to admit it, even to himself, but Nezu wasn't one to ignore the facts of reality when they were presented to him. There was building proof that more than one institution over the years had actively worked to dupe him and his esteemed academy. He felt like such a fool. Regardless of the results of the student in question's therapy, the quirked animal was sure that he'd have to bring up their continued enrollment at UA to the staff. While he knew how he felt about the situation, he owed it to his teachers to allow them a chance to weigh in before any decisions were made. Really, all he could ask them was, UA Emergency Counseling Office 13. Why did you do it, Mineta-san? The question was simple enough, but to answer it in a way that didn't see him expelled, Minoru Mineta knew he'd have to employ brainpower he scarcely believed himself capable of. It was a ruse. The purple ball-headed teen nearly cried out as he attempted to cover for his cowardly behavior. I know I'm no saint, But that didn't give them the right to knock me out before I had a chance to explain what my plan had been. If the purpose of his rambling was to convince the long, dark-haired woman across from him of his intentions, Mineta was doing a terrible job of it. Really now? Izuku grunted out, her harsh eyes doing a poor job themselves of covering how unhappy she was with her assignment. Then please, explain to me in detail this plan of yours that would have gotten you out of the situation you all found yourselves in. That way we can clear this whole misunderstanding right up. This was easier said than done, as anyone with 3 working neurons would have had the ability to read the midget like an open book and discern what his true intentions had been. Mineta was frozen in shock. He truly hadn't expected to be asked to elaborate on his proclaimed master plan. Shaking himself, the purple ball-headed teen cleared his throat with obviously fake bravado. Well, the hesitation lasted for only a second, but it was enough for all of Mineta's bluster to instantly die. I just needed them to distract the villains for a minute, see? Then while they were busy I would use my quirk to immobilize. One look at the sharpening eyes of the frightening woman across from him was enough for Mineta to realize he'd fucked up. Why did you apply to U8? Izuku asked suddenly, the question feeling like being splashed with acid to the purple ball-headed teen. What part of heroics drew you in? Mineta swallowed thickly. He really didn't like where this conversation was going. Not in the slightest. UA press conference. Nezu allowed his thoughts on the second wayward member of 1A to end, turning his mind instead to the lucky break that they'd been given in regards to one of the more debilitated victims of the USJ assault. The quirked animal felt slightly bad about being grateful for the negligence of one of his students' parents, but in this case he'd been forced to accept it as necessary. As it stood, whenever either of the affected students' parents found an available space in their schedule to make it to UA, their child would already be fully healed by recovery. Girl. Any possible complaints regarding such could be immediately shown as having been needless. What worried Nezu more was the possible future reaction of this student to also having been exposed to 1A's possibly soon-to-be second fallen classmate's actions. Those accusations wouldn't be written off so easily. But as long as they got through this press conference without the particulars of that situation coming to light, the quirked animal was confident in UA's ability to handle the coming fallout without involving the media. Still, Nezu had to wonder how the young woman was doing now. UA Emergency Counseling Office 9. Risa Oyanagi stared at the mature-looking teen sitting across from her with slight apprehension. The young woman wasn't just 1A's academic recommendation student, but also the heiress of a powerful family. As much as she hated to admit it, more caution than she'd like had to be exercised here. And how are you feeling now? Oyanagi asked respectfully, I mean, in regards to what happened during the incident overall, not your recently healed injuries. Momoyarazu took a deep breath, trying to focus her thoughts. Her mind turned back, considering the feelings she'd experienced during those terrible moments, and the judgments she'd laid against herself since that time. She'd briefly considered hiring a personal therapist through her family, but when she realized even Ida was breaking with tradition and accepting the principal's offer of assistance, she decided to show solidarity with her classmates and do the same. I feel ashamed, Momo finally revealed, believing these the best words to describe her feelings. But like a dam bursting, once began, the words continued to flow. I was always taught to remain calm and focused in any situation, to keep doubt from my mind, face adversity with logic and determination, and find, without failure, the best solution to the problem at hand. But when the situation called for all of that, I failed. I failed so completely that the person I was protecting had to protect me in the end. Oyanagi hadn't expected all of that. Her hand could barely keep up with all the notes she was taking. I allowed my childish pride, and the belief I had everything under control blind me. My poor Lily-chan. She had to go feral. Hurt herself. To save me because of that, Momo barely took a breath. Oyanagi was puzzled by the mature teen's words, But her patient continued before the older woman had a chance to ask for clarification. To think. She was forced to resort to such a thing. All because I hesitated to act. Yaozu-san. Aoyanagi hesitated, suddenly unsure if her patient remembered the grim fact of this Lily's situation and hating she'd have to be the one to remind her if she didn't. But it needed to be done if necessary. You are aware the being known currently as Lily Hoshikawa is deceased, aren't you? The older woman began to fear the worst, that her patient had experienced a full-blown mental break as a result of the villain assault. Upon seeing the heiress stare back at her like she was crazy. Deceased? The question sent alarms blaring into Oyanagi's mind, only to be dispelled as the mature teen continued. Ah. Right. You mean that she's a zombie now? Yes, I'm well aware. Midoriya-kun granted her a miracle by bringing her back from the dead, allowing her to enjoy a little bit more time amongst the living. The sudden look of unfathomable giddiness and longing that contorted the heiress's face sent a different kind of alarm blaring through Oyanagi's mind. Ah, she's just so tiny and cute. Momo exclaimed in absolute delight. Just the thought of her possibly only having a limited amount of time before she finally continues her final journey makes me want to hug her so tightly. Aoyanagi gave a nervous chuckle at the otherwise mature girl's exuberance. The older woman reminded herself that the girl was rich and the heiress of a powerful family, meaning that she couldn't just write her off as crazy. Maybe highly eccentric would work for now? UA press conference. Nezu and Aizawa left the press conference with downcast eyes, returning to the principal's office with little issue. The quirked animal was grateful that his fur was already white, it easily hid all the new great hairs he'd just gotten. The underground hero, on the other hand, was once again thankful for the blood coursing through his veins. He wouldn't have been able to last through all that hell without its strength. Finally, that's over with. Nezu sighed. Reaching for the coffee pot he'd set a timer to start around the time of the conference's projected end. It was still warm. That felt more like a witch hunt than our last few, if you ask me. It could have been worse, Aizawa replied, surprisingly pulling out a cookie from his hardly worn suit. Much worse. Dancing with the devil had never been a more proper analogy for a situation in the underground pro's opinion. He'd lost track of the number of times he'd felt his student's blood calm him down when he'd otherwise have snapped at an errant reporter or stubborn journalist. Unfortunately, now he had to deal with an extreme case of hunger. Maybe he should allow some sort of refreshments to be served in class in the future? He couldn't imagine it'd hurt in keeping his energy levels up. It'd surely help Izuku, Midoriya as well. Don't remind me, Nezu said with a heavy tone, still unable to understand the mindset of the press officials they just faced. No matter how much effort I put into it, I just can't seem to understand the need of the media to fault the innocent when something catastrophic happens. While it was true between himself, Aizawa, and Buru Asui they were able to successfully keep the reporters and journalists away from the darker truths of what happened during the USJ assault, the visceral bloodlust the men and women had radiated at. The idea of getting dirt on his academy had been exhausting to deal with. No matter how many times they tried to redirect them, questions inevitably returned trying to pin the responsibility for everything on the academy or vilify its victimized students. In the end, however, between Aizawa's rare, calm statements, his acumen, and the Asui matriarch's craftiness, they'd managed to navigate the tides in such a way as to shift the blame successfully onto All Might and all the resentful villains that had no longer been able to commit their crimes as easily as they once had. Succinctly, that had meant that there had been no way to actually blame anyone but the attackers. Hopefully they'll leave our students alone now, Aizawa added, taking a bite of the treat in his hand and finding it unbelievably tasty. He was surprised to feel this way, as he hadn't thought of himself as one with a sweet tooth prior to this. 1A needs peace and time to heal, especially with what we're going to put them through soon enough. At UA cafeteria, Tenya Ida was lost in thought, unable to enjoy the fabulous smells swirling around him as the results of his first therapy session finally settled in. The truths of his heart had been rightfully brought to light, and he stood as his own harshest judge. "Am I really?" Ida muttered, grimacing at the implications of his therapist's words. "That wrong?" Deciding to forego his family's traditional pro-hero therapy counselor for UA had been an easy enough decision for the stern teen. He'd already been given, as he saw it, preferential treatment, twice before due to his family's prestige, but this time he'd wanted to experience something with his classmates, to bond with them in some fashion. And at first it had been exactly as he'd expected it to be. The first issues tackled were his feelings of failure and cowardice. Realizing that he'd arrived too late with the cavalry came as a mighty blow to the diligent teen's self-esteem, especially since he'd already felt like he'd deserted his classmates to fend for themselves by accepting the role of retriever in such a tactic. The consummate professional they'd been, Ida's therapist had quickly asked him if such ideas meant he no longer felt worthy of attending UA. The shock of such a question, followed by his vehement denial, had apparently been exactly what the man had been looking for. Then the session had shifted tone, and its topic had left the studious teen feeling uncomfortable with himself. "Why didn't I trust him?" Ida asked the empty air as he continued his aimless walking. "Those precious seconds could have meant fewer injuries my classmates would have had to suffer." A few cleverly placed innocent questions had revealed an ugly truth to the speedster, one he fervently wished wasn't the case. When it came down to it, he didn't trust Madrya. It had rankled the bespectacled teen's sense of heroism to admit it, but his therapist had assured him that realizing a problem existed at all was the first step in addressing and overcoming it. And it was a problem, a huge one at that. No respectable hero could operate while antagonizing, let alone mistrusting, their peers. The larger problem was, he didn't know why he felt the way he did about his class's vice president. "Maybe I should ask Tensai?" Ida sighed in defeat. Abruptly, the speedster caught sight of a familiar face in the crowded lunchroom. "Is that Uraraka?" Without consciously noticing, the bespectacled teen had walked himself across the entirety of the cafeteria to the wall-length bay of windows looking out at the campus grounds beyond. And there, sitting by herself at one of the barn stools and looking out with a teary face, was none other than Okako Uraraka. Despite his usual lack of understanding of the fairer sex, Ida was easily able to tell that his normally bubbly classmate was showing signs of being depressed. In fact, she looked quite ready to start crying at a moment's notice. "Uraraka-san?" Ida's unexpected voice caused the girl in question to let out a startled yelp. The anti-gravity girl held a panicked look in her eyes when she turned around. "Are you all right?" Okako wasn't all right in the slightest, but still allowed a relieved sigh to escape her lips. For a moment she'd thought that Izuku had found her, and was about to offer her emotional support. The very idea was unbearable considering in a way it was the cinnamon roll's fault she felt like this. His, and the clearly possessive Tsu's. "I'm not," Okako whispered, failing to find the energy to even lie. The blunt honesty would either scare Ida away, or gain her some much-deserved consolation. "But thanks for asking." If the brunette had been asked, she would have said she expected her tall classmate to politely excuse himself and walk away. Or he might have said something stupid and out of context as usual. It was to her surprise then, when he slowly slid into the stool beside her. As troubled as Ida was, he felt that leaving a classmate in such obvious distress, truly a deplorable state of being, would be simply too wrong to abide by. He was neither their class president nor vice president, but even so, he still felt as if he should offer some sort of support to a classmate in need. "Do you wish to talk about it?" Ida asked in an uncharacteristically low and calm voice, his usually arm-chopping nowhere to be seen. "Is it related to the therapy?" Okako blinked, needing a moment to think. The anti-gravity wrestled with herself. Should she unload her woes to her stiff classmate, or keep them bottled up until she exploded? She'd already hidden her true feelings from her therapist once already, and she was regretting it now. In the end, the decision was rather simple. She decided to talk. After all, there was no one else she could confide in. Mina would have probably laughed before gossiping about her. Jiro just wasn't girly enough to understand her problems. Momo would have grilled her for every little detail but then offer no real solution. Tsu was obviously out of the question, and she couldn't find Taru. I'm heartbroken. And with those simple words, Okaku introduced the poor unsuspecting Ida to the world of love drama. Boomed up here mighty theme park, noon. The giant, light-bedazzled gates of the local theme park stood imperiously before the green-haired couple of Izuku and Tsu, causing both teens a sudden case of trepidation. With only one final step forward, they would officially begin their first ever date, and both were incredibly nervous. This state hadn't been helped in the slightest when Inko and Baru had been told of the date's existence. Both mothers had been delighted at the news, going so far as to provide extra funds so the duo could eat and drink without worry. It was almost like the older women had wanted the teens to stay to their heart's content. Yeah. Tay's soft groan was accompanied by a gentle nudge to the duo's backs. The zombie girl seemed to have decided that both were awkward enough to have stayed standing by the entrance until the park closed unless given aid. Izuku snorted at the impression his first partner gave off, unable to completely dispute it on his side. While beyond accommodating to the date, Inko had insisted the two take a chaperone, Tay being the obvious choice. Izuku had intended to leave the zombie girl at home, but his mother had insisted, for security if nothing else. It hadn't done his argument any favors that his first partner had shown clear reluctance to leaving him alone. Luckily, Inko had, upon his acquiescence, then graciously provided a little extra in the way of date money in case the park staff charged for Tay's admittance. So Izuku couldn't complain too much. Lily, however, had been left in the care of the MMO, who'd taken the news almost too happily. The mature young woman had vehemently stated that their date didn't need the burden of a child distracting them, which would have been more believable if she hadn't been crushing the littlest zombie girl to her chest with a hug at the time. I know, Izuku murmured back to Tay, not feeling even a hint of irritation at the zombie girl for her support. It was just, he felt like he looked too unassuming. His casual clothes weren't anything flashy and, just like his school attire, made him feel like he faded into the background. In comparison, Tsu's green and white lace blouse and jeans combo did everything to pronounce her beauty to the world. The dichotomy of their appearances left him with the fear that other boys would attempt to hit on her during their date. Just the thought sent an uncomfortable flash of anger surging through his chest. "Relax, Izuku," Tsu said, hugging his arm. The innocent action, to the green-haired male, couldn't have been more sinister, pressing the frog girl's surprisingly ample breasts against him. Izuku's heart stuttered. "Let's go enjoy ourselves, Karo." Taking a deep breath, Izuku allowed the knowledge he was loved and accepted envelop and empower him. His therapist had been right earlier, he did have at least two people who cared deeply for him, and he wasn't going to ignore that anymore. Marching forward, the three made their way to admissions. As expected, the ticketeer demanded payment for Tay as well, but even the fat man's rude attitude couldn't touch the high spirits of the young couple. Unbeknownst to the verdant couple, another pair had been tailing them since their departure from the train station minutes earlier. "They have entered the gates of fun most amusing," Tokoyami declared in quiet flair to his current partner, out of the common person's perception by standing discreetly in the shadow created by a three-dimensional advertisement for the theme park. The avian teens, large eyes cast about, keeping a lookout in case a pink-hued bundle of trouble decided to poke her head out. "Have you finished with Carrie, damn it man? I'm just asking if you know where Mina is right now." Tokoyami slumped. "That answers that." Unlike her partner, Jiro was having a harder time completing her first mission of the night. After finding out the cute couple, plus zombie, had planned a date night, the punk rock girl had decided to follow them to ensure nothing ruined their outing. Since Mina had seemed rather restless since the USJ went down, the musician had feared the Pinkette would strike at her favorite targets today of all days to quench her need for fun and laughs. To head that complication off before she became one, Jiro had thought to employ the assistance of the one person she knew who could keep up with the excitable acid user, Ijiro Kirishima. All the redhead had to do was tell them where Mina was, and then they'd know whether or not they'd need to worry about Izuku and Tsu while they had fun at the theme park. So why was the manly man of 1A being so difficult? What do you mean, why am I asking you? Jiro hissed into her phone, feeling her nerves fray at her red-headed classmate's constant questions. Who else would know where she is? No one's been able to get a hold of Taro in days. Tokoyami sighed from his shadow. This was getting them nowhere. What was worse was that the longer they waited for Jiro to finish failing at interrogating their classmate, the further Izuku and Tsu got lost in the bustle crowd of the theme park. Leaning backward, toward the punk rock girl, the avian teen silently held out his hand for the phone. The proffered appendage hung between the two partners in surveillance for a moment, one now looking at the other with a disbelieving raised eyebrow. Knowing they didn't have much time, Jiro quickly gave in and handed the device over. Kirishima, Tokoyami intoned, deep voice causing the redhead on the other end of the line to suddenly tense. Surely you have perceived the marked change in Mina's behavior since our survival of the USJ assault? Seize these times of liberation from our studies and aid your longtime friend in recovering fully from an experience you in part shared. Is it not the manly thing to do? There was a beat of silence. Jiro held her breath, unbelieving that her normally edgy classmate had been so straightforward, for him, with the redhead. Also, Midoriya and Asui are currently traversing the rigors of their relationship's first couples engagement, and we don't want Mina to interfere. Thank you. Before Kirishima could have attempted a response to the sudden information, Tokoyami had hung up the phone and handed it back to Jiro without another word. The punk rock girl blinked at what she'd just witnessed. Originally she'd thought her partner had just tagged along because he'd had nothing better to do, but now it was pretty clear to her that the avian-headed teen was dead set on allowing his close friend the opportunity to enjoy his day with his princess. And hey, it was the least they could do for the guy who'd unknowingly saved so many of them during the class's crisis. Do you think Kirishima will be able to pull it off? Jiro asked, breaking the silence that had overtaken the pair. Tokoyami shrugged, looking as unconvinced as a teen with a raven's head could. As much as I wish to place faith in our stalwart classmate, I do believe it would be remiss of us to not take up the role of discreet escort for now, the avian teen replied. Stepping from his shadow, Tokoyami checked his wallet, realizing only now that the theme park was a bit pricier than he'd originally expected if he wanted to both follow his friend and cover his partner's fare as well. Budget's gonna be a little tight it seems. While too low for what passed as a normal person nowadays to hear, to the punk rock girl, the obvious slip in speech pattern had been clear as day. I'm paying my own way, don't worry, Jiro assured, hoping to lighten her partner's concerns. It was only fair, she had her own reasons for carrying out this plan after all. It's really too much for one person. Tokoyami merely nodded, accepting his partner's choice. Together, the two waded through the growing crowd and entered the bustling theme park. Somewhere in Shiba Prefecture, Ijiro Kirishima stared at his phone in bewilderment, still processing what his avian-headed classmate had just said. It was true that Mina had been acting a bit different than normal lately. Like the pink cat would vacillate between having too much energy with no outlet and just shutting down. He knew he hadn't seen her this jumpy since the week they'd had to wait for their letters from UA, but after the USJ, he'd thought it had been a normal reaction. But Tokoyami was right. Helping Mina out, especially since they'd shared part of the battle for survival, was the manly thing to do. Sitting around wasting time like he'd been doing was a discredit to everything he'd been working toward. Feeling a familiar rush of passionate determination, Kirishima turned around and grabbed the shoulders of the pink cat in question, surprising her out of whatever funk cat had her staring blankly out into the distance. The redhead's sudden excitement smothered the small squeak that the acid user unconsciously let out as she refocused on him. Mina. Let's ditch this place and go somewhere else. Large pools of unique black and gold blinked in shock and puzzlement. The pink cat didn't quite understand what her friend was saying. They'd just gotten to the arcade a few minutes ago. Hadn't they? Where was this coming from? What do you mean, Carrie? Mina asked, a perplexed look screwing up her face. We haven't even played out our usual gaming circuit yet and you already want to leave? Those eyes did something to Kirishima as he stared into them, but he pushed the weirdness away in favor of helping his friend get back to normal. And he knew just the thing for her. I know, and I promise I'll make it up to you later, Kirishima said while using one hand to bring up his phone. After clicking through a few web pages, he found what he was looking for, and they were in luck. But just look at this and tell me the arcade can't wait. Mina stared into the glowing screen for a second before the colorful images and words registered in her mind. The instant they did, the pink cat let out a whoop and snatched Kirishima's hands up faster than he could follow. Why didn't you tell me our favorite classic action movie series was coming back to the local repertory theater? The massive grin on Mina's face was infectious, and soon enough the two best friends were ducking out of their favorite arcade and racing towards their favorite second-release movie theater. Their evening would soon be filled with the binging of a classic tale that all started with a man being sent to the past to stop sentient machines from taking over the world. As the two ran, Kirishima's eyes widened as Tokoyami's last piece of information finally hit him. Izuku and Tsu were on a date. Boomed up here mighty theme park. As was to be expected of a theme park that catered to the public, the general theme was of course the #1 hero. Rides were designed with the man's image, attractions honored his status as the symbol of peace, and even the prizes at the game stalls had been modeled after the pro hero. There were two speeds to the establishment, too fast-paced and intense, like the near-illegal roller coasters, or boringly dull, like the video tributes dedicated to the exploits of the one and only All Might. It quickly became obvious why the pro hero had been able to give such expensive VIP tickets to the green-haired teen so easily. Once upon a time, the boy known as Izuku Midoriya would have loved to have gone on each and every ride in the park multiple times until closing time. But, as that boy grew up, both physically and mentally, his interests shifted and changed as he was marked and put his mark on life. And then he got a girlfriend. Are there any rides or attractions you want to go on? Izuku asked his girlfriend with a sweet smile, lightly squeezing her hand. The Verdanet's desire to please the frog girl was obvious, and clearly well received. For the rest of the day we have all the time in the world to be together. As the duo locked eyes, the world fell away, no longer mattering. Izuku realized he was happy, overjoyed at being allowed to simply be with Tsu. As for herself, Tsu felt like melting at the ardent attention she was being given so freely, attention she'd once only dreamed of receiving. Unfortunately, being knocked in the stomach and sides by children rushing by you tended to break those special moments in time with your loved ones. And so it was that a gaggle of screaming and laughing kids in matching uniforms stampeded by, interrupting the green duo's second of eternity. Huffing at being brought back to reality, Tsu decided it would be a good time to tackle an attraction. There had to be at least some that lent themselves to quality time between couples, right? Taking a look around at the theme park, and all the All Might catering being done, the frog girl decided on one of the few she could see that wasn't centered on the pro hero. What about the House of Terror, Karo? Tsu asked. In her mind, the frog girl was already building a plan. Clichés were a thing for a reason, and what better than a haunted house to give them a bit of a scare so she'd have the perfect excuse to cling to her cinnamon roll. And maybe, if he weren't careful, he'd end up touching some sensitive places? Anything your heart desires, it shall have, Izuku's overly flirty answer, something the green-haired teen had wanted to try at least once that night, caused a number of looks from bystanders. Most were amused at the clear example of a young man putting the moves on his girlfriend. Others projected their annoyance as their own dates looked at them expectantly immediately after the scene, though Tay's harsh glare from behind the green duo was more than enough of a deterrent against those antagonizing few. Hidden behind an ostentatious cotton candy machine that was shaped like All Might's hair, Tokoyami and Jiro shared a nod. Both agreed their froggy classmate had made a sensible decision. Her plan was obvious, and the end result was favorable for a romantic outing. Between Izuku's natural tolerance to scary things and Tsu's capable acting skills, there was no way anything could go wrong. Entrance to the House of Terror. The plan had gone to shit. Staying well back from the garish attraction, Jiro and Tokoyami face-palmed at the theme of the haunted house. It just had to be. Zombies. Even Mina wouldn't have found the turn of events funny. Tsu-chan. Izuku's voice wavered between sweet and annoyed as he took in the sight before them. Maybe we could choose something not exploiting a side effect of my quirk? Tsu could only croak an apology as she nodded in agreement. The attraction was almost built to be a horrible mockery of her boyfriend's individuality. Not only did the structure appear to be in less than perfect condition, even for what it was supposed to represent, but the poorly depicted undead painted across the decrepit facade were too painful to look at for long. And was Tay glaring at the, hopefully, unintended insult to her existence? How about? Tsu hesitated, nervously eyeing the map of the park in her hands. She was afraid of picking another flop. The shooting range? Immediately, the frog girl's mind was filled with another ingenious plan. She remembered an integral part of her boyfriend's fighting style revolved around guns, of a sort. He'd be able to win her a prize easily enough if she asked, and as a reward, she'd just have to give him a kiss. But would he even want to be reminded of fighting while on their date? I can do that, Izuku answered, dumbstruck smile washing away any of the frog girl's concerns. Do you want a plushie? Karo. Tsu nodded in happiness, both that her new plan was already in motion and her boyfriend had so quickly forgotten about her accidental blunder. As the green duo made their way through the crowd toward their new destination, the rocking gothic pair watched them go with dual sighs and slumping shoulders. Well, Jiro started, feeling relief and worry in equal measure, that could have gone worse. But after avoiding one potential disaster, Izuku would now have to deal with the universally understood to be rigged shootings games of a theme park. Agreed. Let us hope the wings of Providence continue to cast their shadow upon our friends, Tokoyami added, dark shadow emerging from his stomach to pat the avian teen on the back. And that the Rosette Terror continues her blessing of absence. After allowing plenty of distance to build between them and their charges, the pair followed. No matter how heavily rigged it was, there was no way the shooting range could be too bad. Shooting range booth. The attendant stationed at the shooting range was seething. As any logical person would realize upon consideration, this particular park game only made profit for the owners when players paid and didn't win anything of high value. Being stationed in an All Might-themed theme park, however, denied the operators the most common method of assuring such an outcome, that is cheating. Eventually, the owners had come up with a way to get around this restriction though. Since the average citizen of Japan never had cause to handle firearms on a regular basis, or build up the skill set to effectively use such, the shooting range had been redesigned to force players to aim at incredibly small targets placed above the prizes they desired to win. As an additional measure, the targets became progressively smaller the more expensive the prize became as well. The number one prize, for example, a life-sized plush doll of the symbol of peace, had a target smaller than the size of a bottle cap. In a dubiously acceptable twist to further turn things in the house's favor, the guns provided, BB guns, had been built with the worst material and specs possible. The sights were all slightly bent, the internal springs were comprised of a heavy metal that created extra, jerky recoil, and the frivolous molding on the ends of the barrels were thicker than strictly necessary, adding disproportioned weight. All of this made aiming incredibly difficult. To top all of this off, no players with quirks that would give their aim a special aid were allowed to participate. And a green-haired teen had just said fuck you to all of that. The attendant had known the boy would be trouble enough when he'd flashed a rare VIP card, granting him a free round of 7 shots. Then the Verdanet had taken his firing stance, and things had gotten worse. His posture had been that of a marksman. Twack! The loud crack of the BB gun's firing mechanism rang through the air for all to hear. The shot missed. But while the green-haired teen had failed to hit his target, the smirk carving its way across his face set off alarms in the attendant's brain. That was the look of someone calibrating their next shot on the fly if he'd ever seen one. Deviation of 6, the teen announced, earning a confused stare from the girl with amphibian features standing at his side. The matter-of-factness of the comment caused a shudder to run through the attendant. Now for the prize. The attendant wanted to vomit. The original target had been the #1 prize, and if he lost the limited edition plushie to a kid, on a free shot no less, then his boss would skin him alive. Swallowing thickly at the thought, the man watched as the green-haired teen reloaded his BB gun with practiced ease, took aim, and, twack! A hole punched through the center of the target above a large frog plush doll. Crank! Twack! The middle of the target above a medium-sized frog with boxing gloves received a hole of its own. Crank! Twack! The brat won another medium-sized frog, this one with an adorable yellow ribbon, as he added a hole to the middle of its target as well. When the green-haired teen stood back, raising his BB gun to point skyward, the attendant couldn't hold back his sigh of relief. The kid hadn't aimed for any of the really big prizes. He'd still have to explain tonight's losses to his boss though. For the most beautiful girl in the whole world, the attendant's green nightmare said, laying it on thick as he handed the large frog plush to a now deeply blushing amphibian girl. The other 2 are for Samadare and Satsuki, so you don't have to share. Even though the plushies, all designed after a slightly outdated mascot, sported fat bodies, stubby limbs, and big heads rounded by chubby cheeks, it was clear to the attendant that the amphibian girl found them absolutely adorable. Her hugging the green-haired teen's gift tightly and burying her face into it in a vain attempt to hide her blush was proof enough. Aga! The sudden groan from the tall zombie standing behind the couple startled the attendant something fierce. Sure, he'd been warned about the undead monstrosity just like the rest of the staff, but seeing and hearing the thing was a whole level of worse than just being told about it. "Excuse me," the green-haired teen called out, dragging the attendant's attention to him. The unsettlingly sweet smile being directed at the man didn't belong on the face of a necromancer. "No sir. Would you mind if Taichan uses my remaining shots?" What a question to ask, the attendant thought to himself. Although, while the park's rules stated no quirks could be used in any of its games, the undead creature didn't look coherent enough to even lift one of the BB guns. And the brat had decided not to aim for the big prize in the end. Well, his night couldn't get much worse, he supposed. "Yeah, sure," the attendant replied after a few seconds, exasperation coloring his tone. "Why not?" Not too far from the shooting range, at a table partially blocked by a balloon stand, the rocking gothic duo was enjoying nachos and soda while keeping an eye open for possible date threats. They were also amazed by the unexpected display of marksmanship from their friend and classmate. Note to self, never be on the business end of one of Izuku-kun's guns. Jiro murmured flatly, unable to stop her staring even after the green-haired teen was done destroying the rigged game. "I feel like he could probably tag a fly on the wings at 100 meters. Don't you?" Truly the scope of his skill is as deep as the darkness he commands in the name of justice, Tokoyami agreed, Dark Shadow nodding along with the avian-headed teen. Both user and sentient quirk had been awestruck by the talent demonstrated. It was even more incredible than shooting Mineta from a moving vehicle. Should he continue, I fear even heroes such as Snipe will see their titles stolen. Jiro chuckled at the thought, before blinking as what her temporary partner hadn't mentioned caught her attention. "What? No comment on me using his name?" the punk rock girl asked while helping herself to some nachos to cover for her genuine interest in the topic. It was unfortunate, but with their restricted budget, they'd had to share a plate instead of getting their own. Both had awkwardly avoided responding to the food vendor's question about them being a couple. Was his offer of true friendship not clear when he spoke both of our given names? Tokoyami asked in turn, shaking his feathered head lightly as he popped a cheesy chip into his mouth. I for one am honored by his invitation. And it would be the height of discourtesy to refuse the use of his name in turn after accepting his. The silence that descended between the two was oddly awkward for a reason they couldn't immediately see. Perhaps it was due to both wondering if, by accepting their mutual friend's offer, it then made it acceptable for them to refer to each other by first name as well. Underneath such weighty consideration was another thought, barely a whisper to either, concerning what that could mean for them. Are you fucking kidding me? The pervasive silence was broken by the enraged scream of the shooting range's attendant, much to the relief of both partners. Turning their attention to the burgeoning scene, Tae holding a pair of new treasures in obvious delight, at least for her inexpressive face, made it clear what had happened. Apparently, the zombie girl was just as good at shooting and aiming as her master. There was no other way she could have won the large, sparkling unicorn plushie that looked ridiculously fluffy or the small All Might doll now in her hands. Before anyone could stop her, Tae promptly began chewing on the miniature symbol of Peace's head. Jiro and Tokoyami couldn't decide whether to chuckle at the sight or worry about it. Forgive me this intrusion. Tokoyami started, dragging the attention of the punk rock girl away from the spectacle before them, but my curiosity refuses to lay shackled any longer. I have been meaning to inquire, but just what significance is it to you that Izuku-kun and Asui-san enjoy themselves tonight? The tensing of her earjacks was the only indication the question had struck a nerve. Tokoyami suddenly hoped his inability to keep his inquisitiveness under control hadn't just cost him a budding friendship. Jiro had known her uncharacteristic interest would be called out at some point or another. After all, to date her interactions with Class 1A's resident necromancer and vice president had been kept rather minimal, definitely nothing to warrant such steadfast camaraderie. Her interactions with their amphibian classmate had been even smaller in size. The punk rock girl stared out at the green-haired teen for a few moments more before turning to lock eyes with the crimson gaze of her partner. You know, it's okay to cut it with the melodramatic act, right? Jiro's unexpected reply clearly caught Tokoyami flat-footed, though she pressed on without making the avian-headed teen sweat. Would it surprise you to hear that he saved my life once? Already reeling, the punk rock girl's revelation rocked Tokoyami's thoughts once more. Even though he'd been well aware of his fellow Master of Darkness's noble disposition, he would have never considered his partner might have faced such peril already, outside of what they'd all faced at the USJ. I didn't. Yes it would. Her partner's stumbling, and very normally worded, response was almost enough for Jiro to giggle. If she did that sort of thing. The sight of a sputtering Tokoyami was even almost entertaining enough for the punk rock girl to leave the mystery at that, but in the end she decided to have mercy and elaborate. Oh, the sacrifices made in the name of continued cooperation. For the next several minutes, Jiro narrated the tale of a young girl, who'd managed to find herself lost in a dark alley, and at the brutal mercy of an armed thug. The story ended with an unknown savior tackling the girl's would-be killer, the girl running away without looking back. When I returned later with a cop, there was nothing, no body of the kid that saved me, and no clues as to where the thug went, Jiro said, explaining what happened next. The amount of blood on the ground was too small to be fatal, so the cop told me to just wait until a missing child report turned up or a hospital contacted the station. The punk rock girl looked up at the passing clouds, smiling slightly as she got to her favorite part of the story. Months passed. The guilt. It ate away at me every day, you know? I know I was just a little girl, but I couldn't live with the thought that I'd run and left whoever was brave enough to step in to face that creep alone, Jiro continued. And then, while my folks were window shopping at the mall, I heard this lady scolding her kid. She went on and on, demanding he never jump between knives and mugging victims ever again. no matter how quickly he healed up. Tokoyami's eyes blew wide open as his partner reached the turning point of her story. He didn't need a description of the child in question to know it had been their mutual friend Jiro had seen. At the same time, a humbling realization struck the avian teen: Izuku had been committing heroic acts long before ever entering the academy. Yet, he was more incredible than he'd ever thought. I had to do a bit of low-key stalking to get his name though, Jiro interrupted Tokoyami's thoughts, causing the teen's avian features to flinch. Stalking? The very notion sparked a slight worry in Tokoyami's stomach. That wasn't a word one used lightly after all. Don't look at me like that, Jiro defended, huffing at her partner's reaction. I didn't do it for long. I stopped once I learned he planned on attending UA. Tokoyami offered only a raised eyebrow in response, silently agreeing to hold judgment until the entire story was finished. It's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I entered UA hoping to meet him if I could, Jiro divulged, looking away. And I planned on telling him he was one of the reasons I decided to become a hero like he'd been that day. I'm still working up the courage for that last one. Staring at the now bashful girl, sitting across from him, Tokoyami suddenly realized something. Just as quickly, he decided it was critical that he clarify his epiphany's validity if he was going to keep working with the punk rock girl. You like Izuku-kun, Tokoyami stated, leaving no room for argument. Don't you? Kyauka-san. The punk rock girl stared back at the avian-headed teen way too intensely for comfort. Behind her dark, violet eyes, Tokoyami could see the indecision between denying the accusation and, "Oi! What's with using my given name all of a sudden?" Kyauka shouted, either dodging the question or too genuinely shocked to care. "Ask permission beforehand. Or else I might get the wrong idea." Wrong idea? Now Tokoyami was confused. What did that mean? Never mind. Jiro waved the question off as she stood up, looking away. They're moving. Tunnel of Love, early evening. With Tsu's choice thoroughly conquered, it had been Izuku's turn to choose an attraction to visit. And he decided to go with a classic. The Tunnel of Love was perfect, it was date-appropriate, had little chance of denigrating either of their quirks, and thankfully, had nothing to do with All Might. Although, being one of the few rides that had nothing to do with the prevailing theme of the park apparently meant the tunnel was left with rather simplistic decorations. The naturally occurring low illumination was abused to get away with cheap animatronics, and outdated music tracks ran on static-filled speakers to set the mood in the background. Neither of the two green teens took notice of any of this. "We're all alone in the dark, Karo," Tsu whispered into Izuku's ear as they gently sailed down the tunnel, they contently chewing on her All Might plushie in the boat behind them. The frog girl sported an adorable crimson blush as she purposefully toyed with her boyfriend's instincts. "Just what did you intend to do, Izuku-kun?" The question, coy as it sounded to the green-haired teen, caused a blush to erupt across his cheeks. Instead of ducking away, however, Izuku moved his arm to hug his princess even closer to his body. Two could play, as they say. "I wanted." Izuku trailed off, cupping his girlfriend's cheek and turning her to face him. Their eyes locked. Stealing his nerves, the hero in training spoke more boldly than he felt. "A kiss." The reaction he got was not the one he expected. So, startled, pulling back to look at him wide-eyed. The frog girl felt the first stirrings of panic flit through her stomach. She could tell her boyfriend wasn't asking for a simple peck on the cheek. In all her daydreams, she hadn't even considered this. Oh, why hadn't she thought about the possibility her cinnamon roll would ask for an adult kiss? What? A kiss? Tsu stuttered, failing to push down her nerves. Don't you find the idea gross? This wasn't to say that the frog girl didn't want to kiss as well. On the contrary, she dreamed of having a prince of her own to kiss since her final elementary school days. There was just one problem. Tsu was incredibly self-conscious of a certain part of her anatomy crucial to the activity that most would probably judge as extremely undesirable. Why would the idea of kissing you, the most beautiful girl in the world, ever be gross? Izuku retorted incredulous. The honest response filled the nervous frog girl with happiness. But it also triggered her bluntness. Because of this, Tsu cried, sticking her tongue out. When the pink muscle was as long as her forearm, the frog girl contorted it like a snake, waving it around slowly so Izuku could see how slimy it appeared covered in her viscous saliva. Point made, she popped it back in her mouth, leaving only the tip poking out. Who would want something like that in their mouth? Karo. Izuku might have loved her, more than she could have hoped for, but Tsu was realistic enough to understand there had to be a limit to even his tolerances of the effects of her quirk on her body. She'd made peace with the fact she'd only ever be able to give her boyfriend pecks on the cheek to show her affection. Maybe that's why groping and cuddling got her so excited. Without a word, Izuku captured the tip of his girlfriend's tongue between his lips. Karo. Tsu hadn't expected the Verdane's action. For a second, the frog girl thought her loving boyfriend had braved the sudden kiss for her sake. Focusing on her cinnamon rolls face, his closed eyes and dumb smile proved otherwise. He almost looked like he enjoyed it. Then Izuku gave a gentle suck to the muscle he'd taken hostage. Karo? Tsu had only felt the heat now flooding through her insides a few times before, and the memories of what she'd been doing by herself during those rare occurrences only made more heat curl through her veins. Her body abruptly felt coiled, preparing for something far more intimate. The frog girl hardly noticed when her mind grew hazy, too giddy with the knowledge that her romantic life was not to suffer any of the handicaps she'd feared all throughout her adolescence. And then Izuku began to caress her tongue with his own. Ishaku. The shout wasn't one of rebuke. Tsu certainly didn't dislike how she felt at all, it was one of warning. If her boyfriend didn't stop soon, she was going to lose control. Years of repressing every lewd thought she'd ever had and telling herself that such actions were never going to be part of her daily activities outside of maybe once after her arranged marriage had left the frog girl. Pent up impulses that had been left bottled up one on top of the other were now being shaken loose, awakening like ravenous beasts. These thoughts and feelings threw themselves against the flimsy barriers of Tsu's self-control. Izuku opened his eyes, peering effortlessly into Tsu's own. The worry and love pouring into her charcoal orbs through the emerald pair above her quickly proved too much for the frog girl to bear. In a last-ditch effort to stop the pleasure searing her insides and frying her brain, the amphibian teen tried to retract her tongue with a sharp pull. Izuku, though, hadn't let go of her tongue. Chu. And now their lips were glued together. White charcoal stared into half-lighted emerald for a second longer, before finally Tsu managed to return her tongue to her own mouth. Seeing the reluctance that his girlfriend was trying to hide from herself, Izuku took the opportunity to introduce his tongue to her mouth this time. This time, Tsu could offer no resistance, moaning in delight. Each second the kiss continued caused her to lose more of herself in the swirling pleasure of the physical evidence of being loved. Hugging her cinnamon roll back, the frog girl accepted that maybe, just maybe, there was nothing wrong with letting her hormones take the reins, just a little bit. 4 boats behind, Tokoyami and Jiro were having a bad time. Ugh. This is so garish. The avian-headed teen complained, glaring at the slapdash decorations and tasteless, generic animatronics. The setup was so bad that after one look, Dark Shadow had refused to come back out. Please. Make it stop. Jiro, finely tuned to sound and vibration as she was, suffered harshly at the hands of the heinous white noise masquerading as background music. Hoping that a distraction would alleviate their torture, Tokoyami decided to press for the information he'd failed to procure earlier. Are you ready to talk now? The questioning look he received told the avian-headed teen his partner had either forgotten their last discussion or was still trying to avoid it. About your feelings, for Izuku-kun. Are we really doing this now? Jiro snarked, understandably miffed about tackling a topic she thought she'd made clear she wanted buried. Tokoyami smirked, shrugged at his partner's reluctance. If that was how she wanted to play, he could be just as brutal as their mutual friend when the situation called for it. I can remain silent if that is what you prefer. The reply was, clever, painfully so. Jiro would have done anything to block out the cruelty being inflicted on her ears by the tunnel's speakers, anything. And it looked like her partner knew that fact and wasn't above taking advantage of it. She'd have given him props. If she didn't want to strangle him. Fine. Jiro relented, accepting she needed a distraction from the torture more than she needed to hold back this secret of hers. I admit it. I used to have a childish crush on Izuku. I even thought that once I met him at UA I'd ask him out. The avian-headed teen, overly focusing on the punk rock girl's words to block out the tunnel's attempts to brutalize their ears, latched onto two unexpected words his partner had used. Used to? Tokoyami asked, confused but slightly relieved at the distinction. What happened? The look he was given wasn't lovelorn or pained in the slightest. It was almost worse though, sad acceptance. I found out my crush liked things on the cute side of the spectrum, Jiro said, looking down. Something I know I'll never be. And I'd rather see him be happy with Tsuchan than have to fake such behavior to even have a chance at getting his attention. As he was finding, was common when spending time with Kajiro, the avian-headed teen found himself confused. Not cute? Why don't you consider yourself cute? Tokoyami asked, a deadpan stare his only answer. I think you are. The instant the words left his mouth, he almost wished he could take them back. Almost. An awkward silence descended between the two, and neither knew what to say to break it. The awful cacophony and decorations that had tormented them suddenly became irrelevant as the thrumming sound of heartbeats drowned out all else. So? Dark Shadow asked, slithering out of Tokoyami's stomach as if summoned by the shift in mood, is this a date now? Back at UA nearly sunset. Nezu couldn't believe he'd been so stupid. Speed walking through the halls to get to the main gates as quickly as possible. The quirked animal knew for once he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd been too focused on pondering out how best to help Wataru Hagakure after reading the concerning report of her first individual therapy session. His customary mental acuity had failed to take into consideration a most important fact. Takeogo was far too sentimental for his own good. Their conversation over the phone hadn't just been disastrous. It had fallen apart. I hope I can make it there in time. Nezu muttered as he tried to nod. He needed to reach the agreed-upon meeting place where Momoyarazu would be returning custody of Lily to their resident necromancer, and quickly. Why had he thought telling Takeo about that was a good idea? What was he thinking? The large bay of doors signifying the front entrance to the building was just coming into his sight when the ground shook, almost as if a stampede of enraged rhinos were charging forward. That was all it took for Nezu to understand he was too little, too late. Magnus, for those wondering, no, the sports festival is not close enough to worry about. Don't worry, next chapter will be interesting, with some quirk usage